With the news that the stable release of Nuxt 3 will be coming out in just a few short days, I thought it was appropriate to create the first and most comprehensive Nuxt 3 course on the market. This is a 9-hour course that is going to be hosted on Udemy. Now we're going to build 6 different Nuxt projects, and we're going to learn so much about Nuxt in the process. If you are on YouTube, the first 2 projects, I am going to go ahead and host them so you guys can take a look and see if you like it. If you're interested in learning more, please feel free to go to the description below and I will have a promo code for my Nuxt course. The first project is mainly focused on refreshing our view and composition API knowledge, but we will look at some Nuxt concepts. It is in the second project where we will dive deeper into Nuxt related concepts and really understand the powers of Nuxt.js. The other 4 projects are going to be hosted on Udemy, and they're going to teach you some of the more advanced Nuxt.js concepts if you want to be a Nuxt.js expert. Welcome everybody to the very first lecture of this incredible and comprehensive Nuxt 3 course. This is a very comprehensive course. We're going to be building many projects and we're going to learn a lot on the way. And I'm super excited that you're here because I love Nuxt 3 and I'm glad I get to share my knowledge about this amazing framework to you. Anyways, let's just go ahead and get into it and define exactly what Nuxt is. So right here on the screen, I have defined Nuxt as a higher level framework that is built on top of Vue. So in order to understand this, let's first discuss exactly what Vue is. And I do expect you to, of course, know what Vue is. If you're taking this Nuxt course, I did mark it as a prerequisite. We'll talk about prerequisites later. But essentially, Vue is a framework that allows us to build web applications. And this framework is built on top of plain vanilla JavaScript. So essentially, back in the old days when we were developing in just HTML and vanilla JavaScript, we had a lot of headaches from the development point of view. We have to do a lot of different things like add event listeners, all these different things that are just not quite developer friendly. So then these frameworks started popping up like Vue, Angular, and React that just made the development process a lot easier and a lot faster. So we just got a bunch of additional benefits from a developer point of view with this amazing framework called Vue. Now, the Nuxt team thought that, hey, well, this is giving us a lot of great benefits, but we don't think it's enough. Why don't we take Vue and then build a framework on top of it called Nuxt? And this is going to have additional benefits on top of the existing benefits that Vue has. And that's why it's called a higher level framework. It is a framework that is built on top of a framework. And in this case, it is Vue. Nuxt is very similar to Next.js if you're familiar with React. Next is a framework that is built on top of React, which is itself a framework or a library. So it's a framework built on top of a framework, thus it's a higher level framework. Let's now go ahead and discuss some of the benefits that we get from Nuxt that we don't get right off the bat with Vue. So one of the first benefits and the more prominent benefit is file-based routing. Now, when we ever want to do routing in a typical Vue application, we actually have to define it in code. Not with Nuxt. All we have to do is specify a file in a special directory, and there we go. We have just created a new route in our web application. If this doesn't make sense to you, of course, we are going to look at examples with the projects that we build. But this is one very important benefit. Another cool thing that we get with Nuxt is auto importation. So we never really even have to specify the things that we want. We can just go ahead and use them and Nuxt will auto import them. Composables are a thing that we get with Nuxt to manage global state. Global state can be a tricky thing to manage inside of a typical Vue application. We either have to use outside libraries or things like Vuex, and it can get a little bit complicated. composables make it really easy to manage global state inside of Nuxt applications and use them throughout our pages and components. We also have the ability to specify an HTTP server within our Nuxt application. If we wanted to specify a server and create a server with a Vue application, it would have to be a completely different code base. Maybe we would build it in Django or Express or Nest. But actually with Nuxt, we can create a server within the Nuxt code base, which is just a really cool thing to have. We also get a lot of additional features like middleware, plugins, all these different complicated things that we'll talk about a little bit later. But the best thing that we get, and probably the most important thing that we get, is universal rendering. Now this right here deserves its very own video, so let's talk about this in the next one. In order to understand exactly what universal rendering is, let's talk about how HTML elements are rendered in a typical Vue application first. So right over here I have two rectangles. The gray one is going to represent our browser, whereas this green one is going to represent the Vue server. So let's say on my browser I go to www.mywebsite.com. So once I go onto this website, what's going to happen is the browser is going to make a request to the Vue server asking it for HTML in order to render it in the screen. Now what the Vue server is going to do by default is send back an empty HTML file. Now it's not going to be completely empty. It's going to have the HTML head as well as a body as well as maybe an empty div, but it's going to have none of the elements that we have defined in our Vue application. So other than just the typical boilerplate, it's going to be completely empty. Now because of this, it's going to go ahead and render that, but we're not going to have any of our elements. And because of that, we're going to be currently in a loading state. So our user is not going to see our elements whatsoever. After a short period of time, it's then going to send the JavaScript file. Now the JavaScript file is going to contain all of the information about all of the different elements that we need on the screen. So it's going to contain all that information and it's going to create all of these different elements and render them on the screen. So the browser, what it's going to do is grab that JavaScript file and start parsing it. Now we're still going to be in a loading state, but as soon as it's done parsing, then we will have the elements all created and fully interactive. Now this right here is known as client-side rendering. Why is that? Because the rendering of the UI elements is completely done in the client, the browser, not the server, the client. Once we get the JavaScript file, the client is the one that parses it and creates the UI elements. So this is client-side rendering. Now let's talk about another type of rendering called server-side rendering. So in server-side rendering, we have our browser, we have our server, we make the same exact request to mywebsite.com, and what ends up happening here is right away what we get is the HTML of that specific page and the JavaScript. So we get both right away, and we don't just get an empty HTML file, we get again both the full elements as well as the JS, and then right away you can see we have a fully interactive application. So that right there is server-side rendering, because the server is the one that is responsible for rendering the elements, and then it just sends it to the client and the client just uses it. So the server-side rendering. So now that we understand both, let's talk about universal rendering, which is what Nuxt uses. So it's a little bit of both, a little bit of server-side rendering as well as a little bit of client-side rendering. So over here we have our browser, our server. We make a request, and then our server is going to send back the HTML of that particular page. However, it is not going to send the JS. It's going to send just the HTML of that page. So as you can see here, we can render the UI elements. However, they're all grayed out. They are not interactive. After a short period of time, then it's going to send the JS. And what's going to happen is a process known as hydration. So hydration is where we actually make these static UI elements interactive by parsing the JavaScript. So that is exactly what hydration is. And at that point, then the UI elements are going to be functional. So there is going to be a period of time where we can see the elements, but we can't really interact with them. And then only once we get the JavaScript and it's parsed and all the hydration is done, then they become interactive and we can actually use them. This right here is known as universal rendering, which is exactly what Nuxt utilizes. In this video, what I'm going to do is explain some of the pros and cons between client-side rendering as well as universal rendering. Now to do this, I am going to go to the Nuxt 3 documentation page and I'm going to click on the rendering modes. Now, I haven't showed you the documentation. It is amazing. Now, if you don't want to look at the documentation, I try to cover almost everything here in this course, so you don't have to worry about that. But if you ever need a quick refresher or a change in perspective, this documentation is terrific. Highly, highly suggest it. So it's at v3.nuxtjs.org. Really, really good. So over here, I clicked on rendering modes. And as you can see here, we got client-side rendering. We also have universal rendering. Now, by default, a Nuxt application is going to render everything with universal rendering. But we can also configure it to do client-side rendering if we want to. Now, we talked about exactly what both are, and hopefully you guys understand them. Now, let's talk about some of the pros and benefits. And you can see here, we get actually a nice list of pros as well as benefits. So let's talk about some of the pros. So pro number 1, development speed. So over here it says when working entirely on the client side, we don't have to worry about server compatibility of the code. For example, by using browser-only APIs like the window object. And this is very true. So by working in the client itself, we don't have to worry about the server at all. And this actually gives a really good example. Let's say I want to use window. If I were to use server-side rendering, I have to check that, hey, are we in the browser? Is the elements in the browser? Then we can use a window. So it just makes it a lot easier and a lot faster. So development speed is better. Now, it is also cheaper because we don't handle a server. Everything is running inside of the browser. So we're client-side rendering. We're not handling a server to send off all these HTML pages. And over here, when we're offline, it is better because, again, everything is running in the browser. We do not have to make a request to a server, which requires an internet connection. So those are some of the pros. Now let's look at some of the cons. Now, performance is one big con, mainly because, well, I showed you this. We have to go ahead and wait for everything to render first. You can see the process. We have to wait for everything to render, then we need the JS, then we need to parse it, and then we get our HTML. So performance, not that great with client-side rendering. Also, search engine optimization isn't that great because, well, as soon as we hit this page, all we're getting back is an empty HTML file, and that is what we are rendering. For search engine optimization, that's going to parse the HTML, it's going to see nothing, and it's just not going to be good, and we might not be ranked as highly. So that is another con. So now let's talk about universal rendering, its pros and its cons. So pros, obviously performance. Right away, we get at least the HTML, so it seems as though we're getting our data, and then once we get our JavaScript, we can just quickly hydrate it and make sure that everything is rendered properly. Search engine optimization is great because, again, right away we're getting, let's go over here, right away we're getting the HTML, so as soon as a search engine goes ahead and parses it, it sees the HTML and it will allow us to rank a little bit higher. Now, cons are kind of the opposite of the pros here. So development constraints, it could be trickier, and it is definitely trickier to develop, knowing that we are universal rendering because we always have to keep the server in mind. And also cost. So the cost of infrastructure, now we need a server to continuously run, and that is going to obviously be more expensive. So those are the pros and cons, and it's definitely important to weigh the two together. I really like universal rendering, and it's something that I typically do, but again, you gotta weigh the options depending on the app. In this video, what I'm going to do is talk about some of the prerequisites that you need in order to take this course. Now, there isn't a lot based on knowledge. In this video, what we're going to do is talk about some of the prerequisites that you need in order to take this course. Now, there isn't a lot of knowledge-based prerequisites, but if you're taking this Nuxt course, I do expect you to know the basics of Vue. Now, Nuxt is a framework that is built on top of Vue, and thus we are going to be using Vue code all the time, so you need to know at least the basics. And ideally, know Vue 3. Nuxt 3 uses Vue 3, and it'll be really nice if you are familiar with the composition API. If you're only familiar with the options API, that is actually okay. The first lecture is going to get us familiar with the composition API as well as a quick little Vue refresher, but it would be nice if this is something that you are already kind of familiar with. But this right here is not a prerequisite. Vue itself is a prerequisite because I am not going to be teaching Vue. Instead, I am going to be teaching Nuxt. Now, that is knowledge-based prerequisites. That's basically it. Now, in terms of stuff that you need to have installed on your machine, well, you need to have Node.js installed. Now, the installation of this is really, really easy. All you have to do is just go to nodejs.org and just download the recommended for most users version. Very, very easy. In order to check that you have installed everything correctly, you can just go over here to your terminal and let's just open this up. You can just do a node-v, and if you get a version, that means yes, you have installed it correctly. So there we go. Another thing that we need is a text editor. Now, you can use whatever text editor that you want. I will be using Visual Studio Code, which is my favorite. So go to code.visualstudio.com. Again, a very easy download. Just go over here and download it for your operating system. I am using a Mac. Now, the last thing, and this is not a prerequisite, but it would be helpful if you ever get stuck and you want to go to a version of my lectures, is to know the basics of Git and have Git installed on your machine. So for each lecture, or maybe not for each lecture, for most lectures, I'm going to have the source code attached in a branch that I host on GitHub. If you ever want to see that source code for that particular lecture, you're going to have at least the basic understanding of Git and GitHub. Now, I'm not going to be explaining that in this course. I do have a YouTube video on Git and GitHub if you want to take a look at that, or you can take a look at any other YouTube videos out there. It is relatively simple. But this is the website in order to install Git on your local machine. And that's pretty much it. Those are the only requirements. Before we get started, let's discuss exactly how you can get help if you are stuck in the course. These are the steps that I recommend, and I recommend that you take them in order. Step number 1 is to look at the documentation. So go to the Nuxt 3 documentation and read through it. It's really, really good, and it's a really good way to enhance your knowledge, your Nuxt 3 knowledge, rather than quickly trying to ask a question and getting the answer. Step number 2 is to check the lecture source code. Now, not all lectures, but most lectures will have a branch associated to them on GitHub, and I will link it to the video. So check that and see if there's any differences between your code and the code that is hosted on GitHub. Now, the last solution is, of course, ask a question. So go ahead, feel free, ask a question. I always keep up with them. Now, I am only one man, so I might be 1 or 2 or 3 days late, but I will eventually answer the question. Now, if you do indeed answer a question and it is a problem with your code, it's a debugging kind of problem, I really, really recommend, so I can ease in and answer your question a lot faster, I really recommend host your application on GitHub and then share the GitHub repository in that question. That's going to help me debug the process for you because I'll be able to run it on my local environment. Let's go ahead and get our hands dirty and build our very first Nuxt application. Now, this application is going to be a baby name generator. So let's say you're expecting a newborn baby and you can't decide the name. You go to this application, and what it does is you select a few options and it gives you a bunch of suggested baby names. So let's just go through a quick demo. So let's say I want a boy name. I want this to be trendy, so very common, and I also want it to be relatively long. I can go over here and click this button, and there we go. We have all of these different names: Abraham, Benjamin, and William. Now over here, I can also deselect some of the different names that I don't like. So maybe I'm not a fan of Benjamin, so I can get rid of that. And maybe now my only two options are Abraham and William. Let's go ahead and go through that again. Maybe I want a unisex name. I want it to be a unique name, and I don't care about the length. So over here, now we have Jude, Sunny, Tennessee, and I'm not even going to pronounce that. Again, you also have the option to get rid of these names. So this is a very, very simple application, and we are going to be building it with Nuxt. So let's go ahead and quickly discuss exactly what we are going to be learning when building this application. So the first thing that we're going to learn is View 3. So this is going to be kind of a refresher to View 3. I do expect you to know at least the basics of View 3 and have a good fundamental understanding of the composition API, but we're going to have a quick refresher with this project. We're also going to learn how we can create a brand new Nuxt application, because we are going to be building this app with Nuxt. So we're going to learn exactly how we can use the Nuxt CLI to create a brand new Nuxt application. The next thing that we're going to learn is TypeScript. If you are unfamiliar with TypeScript, that is A-OK, but Nuxt 3 is actually going to be built on top of TypeScript. TypeScript is the default way of utilizing and developing in Nuxt 3, so we're going to learn a little bit of TypeScript as well. Again, if you don't know any TypeScript, I'm going to try to explain it as well as possible. This is not a prerequisite. The last thing is components. Now, components is something that we've been dealing with Vue all the time, but there's a different way that we're going to be dealing with them in Nuxt. It's a little bit simpler. So we're going to learn exactly how we deal with components inside of a Nuxt application. So let's just go ahead and get right into it by creating our very first Nuxt application. In this video, what we're going to do is create our very first Nuxt application. Now, this is going to be very, very simple, especially now that we have installed Node on our machine. Because all we need to do now is open up our terminal, which I have open right over here, or your command prompt if you're on a Windows machine, and very simply move into the directory where you want your Nuxt application to live. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move into my desktop directory, then I'm going to move into my Udemy directory, and then I'm going to move into my Nuxt directory, and then right over here, I'm going to do a ls, and I'm going to move into my content directory because that's where I want my project to live. Of course, you guys probably are not going to have all these directories. You can either put it in your desktop or whatever directory that you want. Now in here, we're going to execute a very simple command in order to create a bare bone Nuxt application. We're going to do npx, which we are going to get if we installed Node, and then nuxt, this is the Nuxt CLI, and then over here, we're going to initialize, what we want to do is initialize a new app. So we're going to say npx nuxt init, and then we're going to give our application a name. I'm going to call this O1 baby name generator. The reason why I'm calling it O1 is because we're going to have multiple projects, and I just want to organize that this is the very first project. So baby name generator. So I'm going to go ahead and execute that. And right away, if I do an ls, you can see that this has been created. So this new Nuxt project has been created. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up an instance of VS Code. Let's go ahead and open that up. And let's open up that project that we just created. So I'm going to go to desktop, and then I'm going to go to, where was it? Udemy, and then Nuxt, and then content. I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And there we go. So this is our bare bone Nuxt application. Let me just zoom in once more, zoom out here, zoom out here. I think that should be good. So we get this bare bone Nuxt application. Now, if you're familiar with Node, well, you can go to the package.json and actually look at all of the different dependencies. The dependency that this needs is Nuxt 3. And all dependencies inside of a Node application actually live in something called the Node modules. Now, right now, inside of this bare bone application, this doesn't exist at the moment. So what we need to do is go to our integrated terminal over here and just very simply do an npm install in order to install all of the dependencies, which is just basically this right over here. Now, as that goes on, we should see our node modules, and then we should be able to start up our application. Now, this might take some time, so I'll see you guys in the next video. The download just finished, and now we have this node modules that contains all of the different dependencies that we need to run our application. So let's actually go ahead and run our newly created Nuxt application. Now, in order to do this, what we're going to need to do is go to the package.json. And in here, you can see we have 3 different scripts. Now, in order to run our application in development mode, so in a development environment, what we're going to do is run npm run dev, which is going to run nuxi dev. Remember, nuxi is the Nuxt CLI that is going to execute the dev command. This is going to spin up the application on localhost 3000, and anytime we make any changes to our code base, it is going to detect those changes and put those changes on localhost 3000 as well. So it's going to continuously watch for those changes. So let's go ahead and run npm run dev. I'm going to go over here to our terminal, and inside of the terminal, I'm just going to close this up a little bit. I'm going to do npm run dev. Now notice one thing, as soon as I run npm run dev, we're going to get a new directory right over here called .nuxt. This is the build directory that we're actually going to need to utilize in order to deploy. That's just a quick note, but we don't need to work with it right now. So over here, you can see that we have localhost 3000. So now let's go to our Safari application, or Google Chrome. That's actually what I'm going to be using, Google Chrome. And I'm going to go ahead and just paste in localhost 3000, and there we go. We see our boilerplate Nuxt application. So if you see this, you got Nuxt successfully up and running. Now, one thing that I want to note is that I am running this video on a 27-inch iMac. So really, if I went to 100%, it should look a little something like this. But I'm always going to be a little bit more zoomed in than usual, just because obviously this isn't very pleasing to look at. It's very small and we can't see a lot. So I'm zoomed in around like 200%. So over here, we get this very plain boilerplate application. So we have the documentation over here. We can click on it to see the documentation. We can click on to see the Twitter. And then over here, you can see that we can see this welcome page. And this welcome page is either in the app.view directory, or it's in the pages directory, and it's a index.view file. So let's actually explore exactly where this code, where this thing is coming from inside of our Nuxt app. So right now, inside of our Nuxt application, we only have one view file, the app.view. And over here, all we have is a template, just a basic view file, template and a div. And then right in here, we have this Nuxt welcome component. Now, you might be wondering, if you're familiar with Vue, and you should be if you're taking this course, where is this Nuxt welcome component living? This is something that we have to define. Well, this is actually coming from the Node modules. It's something that's built internally with Nuxt. And this is really good. This was actually done on purpose, because a lot of the time when you create a brand new application, you have to do a lot of deletion just to remove all of the different boilerplate. Now, Nuxt understands this, and because of that, it just has this very boilerplate component built into Nuxt itself. And as soon as we want to remove it, all we have to do is just remove the component itself, and we do not have to do anything over here. So let's just go ahead and save that. And if we go back, you can see now we have nothing. It is completely empty. Now, if we go ahead and let's go ahead and just paste this a few times just to prove to you, we should see this 3 different times. So right over here, the app.view is the file that we're going to be working on to build our baby generator application. Later on, when we work on multiple pages, we'll learn a better way to create multiple view files for multiple different pages. But for now, this is what we are going to be working on, the app.view. In this video, what we're going to do is go ahead and build out the HTML template for our baby name generator application. Now, this over here is not going to contain a lot of Vue and Nuxt concepts. Actually, it's probably going to contain none whatsoever. So if you want to skip this section, just go to the branch that I linked on this video and just go ahead and copy the HTML. If not, well, let's go ahead and start building it. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to have an H1, and this is going to be the title of our application, the name of our app. The name of our app is, of course, baby name generator, like so. We'll also have a p tag, and this is going to describe the app. So we can say choose your options and click the and then over here we can say find names button below, like so. Okay, so we have the title, then we have our little description, and if we went ahead and save this, you can see we actually see it inside of localhost 3000, which is great. This is awesome. Now, of course, the styles are not there yet. We'll worry about the styles in the next video. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to have another div. So let's create another div. We're going to give this div a class. We're not going to apply the classes for now, but let's just give it a class. And over here, we're going to say this is going to be the options container. So we're going to say options container, like so. So this is going to contain all of the different options. Now, I'm also going to create another div, and we're going to give that a class, and that's going to say option container. And so this is going to house one individual option. So we're going to have multiple options, I think 3 to be precise. So we can paste that 3 times. So the first option over here is choosing the gender. So let's actually house that inside of an H1. So we're going to say, or H4. So we're going to say choose a gender. So that's going to be option number 1. And then right below, what we're going to have are a bunch of buttons, of course. So over here, let's actually have a div for this to house all of the different buttons. So I'm going to call this, let's call it option buttons, like so. And then right over here, we're going to have a bunch of different buttons. So button, so the first option that we have is boy. And then we're going to have another button for unisex. And then over here, we're going to have another button for girl. Okay, so that's really good. So now what we can do here is basically copy what we have here and paste it right in there. And so now we're going to talk about the other options. So what's the option? Well, this one's going to be the popularity of the name. So over here, we can say something like choose the name's popularity. Okay, and so this is either going to be unique or trendy. So let's go over here. Let's say this is trendy. And then over here, this is going to be unique. And we can get rid of this. Let's get rid of that. Let's save it so we can get some nice formatting. So now that leaves us with the very last option. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go over here. We're going to copy what we got right there. Now this one's going to be the length of the name. So we're going to say over here, choose the name's length. Choose name's length. We're going to have 3 options here. So let's have another button. So option number 1 is going to be long. Option number 2 is going to be all. And then option number 3 is going to be short. So now that is really all it is that we need for our HTML. That's pretty much it. And if I went ahead and looked at the application, this is actually, this should be a working HTML template. You can see that this is really ultimately what we want. Now, of course, stylistically, this is very ugly. So let's actually work on these styles in the next video. In this video, what we're going to start doing is styling these HTML elements. Now again, this isn't really related to Vue 3 and Nuxt, so if you want, feel free to just go to the link, go to my branch, and just copy the source code and skip this video. However, if you want to follow along, then, let's just get started. So the first thing that we need in order to define our styles are style tags, of course. So we're going to say style, and we're also going to say scoped so that these styles can be scoped to this file only. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to style the container. So the container is actually a class that I didn't define here, and it is going to house our entire application. So I want to style this div right over here. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to say class container. Now right over here, let's apply some of the styles. So I'm going to say container. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to change the font family. Now right now you can see that we're getting this default font. So I'm going to change the font family to something like font family. I'm going to say Arial, and then Helvetica, and then sans serif. And that should change, if I refresh, it should change our font a little. Okay. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to change the default color. So the color is going to be RGB. And I'm going to say 27, and then 60, and then a 138. So that's going to be the default color. We're going to have this bluish color, which is nice. And then we also want to center this right in the middle. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give this a max width of around 50 rems. And then I'm also going to give it a margin 0 auto. And I am going to do a text align of center. So now once we do that, you can see now everything is nicely centered in the middle. Okay, so that is the very first thing. Now what I want to do is I want to make this a little bit bigger, this title. So what I'm going to say here is inside of the container, grab the H1, or we can honestly just do H1 because we just have one H1 in there. And we can say font size 3 rems. And now you can see now that is a little bit bigger. Now mind you that I am zoomed in because it would look relatively small if I haven't. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue on. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to start working on the options container. So right over here, this whole thing should be wrapped in a container, and it should have some nice background color. So let's go over here, and let's just say options container. And keep in mind, we have an S here, so options container. And then over here, we're going to have a background color, not clip, color. And this is going to be RGB. And then over here, we're going to say 255. We're going to say 238 and then 236. So that is going to be the color. And you can see here now we're getting that wonderful little color that's wrapping all of our different options. Now the next thing that we need to do is apply a border radius so we can get those rounded corners. So we're going to say 2 rems for that. And now you can see we get the cool rounded corners. Now, of course, we need some padding. So let's go here. We're going to say padding 1 rem. Now we get some nice little padding. And let's actually make this width 95%. So we're going to say 95% of the width, like so. And then what we're going to do is we're going to also apply a margin 0 auto so we can center it. And let's give it a margin top of 4 rems. And we're also going to give it a position relative like so. So let's go ahead and save that. And now you can see that it is very, very big and everything is nicely centered the way that we want it to. Okay, so that is pretty much all we need. Now let's start styling the options themselves. So the option containers themselves. Now the only thing that I want to do is have just a little bit more spacing between each option. Let me zoom out of here a little bit. And so in order to do this, we can just apply a margin. So we can say option and then dash container. And we're going to say margin bottom of, let's go 2 rems here. And there we go. So now we got this wonderful margin bottom. Now, the next thing that we need to do is style the buttons themselves. So over here, what I'm going to do is instead of actually grabbing the button, I'm just going to give all the buttons a class of option because that's exactly what they are. They're options. So over here, let's just give it a class of option, class of option, class of option, class of option. Over here, class of option, and then lastly, class of option right over here. So what I'm going to do is we're going to style the option now. So we're going to give this a background color of white. So we're going to give it a background color of white. We're also going to give it an outline of 0.15 rems. We're going to say solid. And we're also going to say that the color is going to be RGB. And we're going to say 249 and then 87 and then 89. Okay. We're also going to give it a border of none. We're going to give it some padding. This is going to be 0.75 rems. We're also going to give it some width. So let's say width of 120 or 112 rems over here. And let's go ahead and close that off. And now let's give it a font size of 1 rem, a color of RGB. Then we're going to say 27, 60, and 138. And then let's give it a cursor of pointer. And then what do we need? We need font weight of 200. So now if we go ahead and save that, you can see that this is exactly what we get. So this is looking really, really good. Now the last thing that is missing is right over here. So to the right and to the left, we want to have those rounded corners. So what we need to do is we need to actually apply some conditional styles here. So over here, what we can do is at the very top, we can say something like this is going to be to the left. So we can also give this another class of option left. This one is going to be option right. Now we can do the same thing over here. You can say option left here, option right here. And then over here we can say that this is also going to be to the left. This is going to be to the right. Now right down here, now what we can do is just say option left, and we can just give it a border radius. So we can say border radius, and this is only going to apply to the left side. So what we can say here is we can say 1 rem to the top right corner, and then, or sorry, to the top left corner, and then 0 rems in the top right corner, and then 0 rems in the top or the bottom right corner, and then the bottom. Okay, I think I'm getting myself confused here. So 1 rem in the top left, 0 in the top right, 0 in the bottom right, and then 1 in the bottom left. So that's what it means right there. So now what we can do here is copy that, paste it over here, and also now what we could do is just basically flip this around. So you can say 0, 1 rem, 1 rem, and then 0 like so. So now let's just go ahead and save that. And now you can see our styling is pretty much done at this point. So that's pretty much all it is that we need to do for styling. Now let's get into the fun stuff where we start working with Vue 3 and Nuxt. In this video, what we're going to start doing is managing the state of our application. Specifically, we're going to be managing the options that we have clicked on. So when we click on, let's say, girl, our state should change so that girl is the selected option, and this should be all colored in. So we should know how to do this. However, if you don't, let's just go ahead and follow along. So we're going to create a script tag. This is where we're going to house all of our JavaScript, and thus we're also going to house all of our state as well. So right inside of this script tag. So right in here, what we're going to do is we're actually going to use the composition API for this. This is for Vue 3, and Nuxt utilizes Vue 3. So instead of just having an empty script tag, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say script setup, like so. And what I actually prefer to do is grab the script and just place it all the way at the very top. I think it's just a little bit more organized. Doesn't really matter where you place it, but I prefer to have my script here, my template here, and then my CSS at the very end. Okay, so now that we got that set up, we can start creating our state. So let's go over here, and I'm going to declare a new variable, and this variable is going to be called options. Now this is going to store the current state of our application, and it's going to store an object to do this. So what we're going to do is utilize reactive in order to have a state of objects. Now notice that I actually didn't import reactive from Vue. Nuxt is really great when it comes to auto importation. So what we can do here is just very simply say reactive like so, and Nuxt will understand that this is reactive from Vue and import it into this file. So right over here, we're going to have three different states. This is going to be the gender. Initially, let's just set it as girl. And then over here, we're going to have the popularity. So popularity. Initially, let's just send that as unique. And then we're also going to have the length. Initially, let's have that as short. So right over here, this is our current state of our application. And of course, we want to modify this state in some way. But for now, what we want to do is we want to grab the state inside of the HTML template and change the background color of the button. So if it's girl, then this button right over here, it should be colored in. And then over here for unique, because the popularity is unique, this should be colored in, and also this should be colored in as well. So let's actually go ahead into our buttons. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add another class right over here, right at the very bottom. And this I'm going to call option active. So I'm going to say option active, because this is the active button that's being clicked. And we're going to give that some styles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a background color of that border that we have right over here. So this outline. So let's go ahead and copy that and paste that in there. And we're also going to give it a color of white. So we're going to change the color to white like so. And so now what we're going to do is right over here. So right over here on this button, we're going to actually apply that as well. And we should get something that looks like so. Now, right now we are adding it manually. What we want to do is we want to do it dynamically only if the option.gender is equal to girl. So let's go over here and let's actually make this multiple lines because this is going to get a little bit more complicated. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say :class to define that we want to have some sort of JavaScript in these parentheses. And we're going to say only if the options dot length or the options dot not length dot gender triple equals girl, then what we want to do is apply the class. So then we can say and, so and then quotes. Then over here we can say option active. So now if we save that, you can see that this is working okay. And we're probably going to want to do that for all of the other buttons as well. So right over here, we can say if this is equal to unisex. So unisex. And then over here, we can say the same thing and say if this is equal to boy. Let's go ahead and save that. And now let's go ahead and change this, for example, to unisex. Now you can see that this one is the one that is colored in. Okay, so this is looking good. Let's actually apply these to the different buttons as well. So the trendy and unique buttons. So let's just grab this. And let's go here, paste that in. And then let's go over here, paste that in as well. We're going to say if the options dot, and what was it? Options dot popularity. If that is equal to trendy. And then over here, we're going to say options dot popularity. If that is equal to unique. Let's go ahead and save that. And by the way, if you're wondering how in the world do we have access to this reactive state inside of the template, we're not exporting anything. Well, with script setup, we don't have to export anything. Everything is just automatically imported over here, and we can have access to it. Whereas with maybe the script setup function or the options API, we have to explicitly say what we want to export. So that's why we have access to this options object right over here. So last thing over here is what we're going to do is we're going to just copy this, paste that in here like moi. And then over here, we're going to say that this is going to be the length. So length. And then right over here, we're going to change this to, this is going to be long. So let's go ahead and copy that 2 more times. Paste that in there, and then paste that in there. And this is going to be all, and this is going to be short. So that's pretty much all it is that we need. And now you can see that we have some state going on here. Maybe just to make this a little bit nicer, let's make this long so we have, you know, some mixture of things going on. Okay, so this is really good. Now, of course, if we click on it, what we need to do is we need to change our state. And by changing the state, then it will also change the different colors of the buttons. But before we do that, I actually want to refactor the way that we've done this, because we've done this with plain old vanilla JavaScript, but I prefer, in my opinion, to use TypeScript, and that's what we're going to be using throughout this course. So let's actually look at a better way of doing this by utilizing TypeScript. So we have created our state and it is working the way that we expect it to. However, right now we have 2 potential problems that could arise, especially if we haven't worked on this application for a while or if we're working with a larger team. So let's actually talk about that issue. Right now, our options is an object, and that object should only include the gender, popularity, and the length, because those are the only options that we have. However, right now, we have the ability to add other properties. So for example, we can add this random property called milk, and we can assign that to be equal to true. And this is okay the way that we have set things up. And obviously, we probably do not want to add this property inside of this reactive state. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is the value of these properties. Right now, we have specified that this is a girl, but it also could be a boy, and it also could be unisex. However, we could also specify that this is going to be something like, I don't know, girly, or whatever. We can add whatever thing that we want. And obviously, we do not want to have this ability. You can either choose girl, boy, or unisex. Similarly over here, for this property, you can only choose unique or trendy. You can't put anything else in there. So those are the 2 potential issues that we are facing. Now, in order to fix this, what we need to do is explicitly define the type of our properties. And this is where TypeScript comes into place. So right now we've been using plain old vanilla JavaScript. However, what we want to do is use TypeScript to define the types of our variables and our state. Now, if this doesn't make much sense to you, well, let me explain. So in order to actually utilize TypeScript inside of this script tag, all we need to do is right after the setup, or before if you want to, we can specify that the language is going to be equal to TS. And we can go ahead and save that, and there we go. Now we can utilize TypeScript. Now right away you can see that nothing has really changed. If we go back to our application and refresh, nothing has changed. And that's a-okay. This is expected. But now what we're going to do is get a bunch of different properties that we can utilize to define specific types. Just to quickly explain exactly what I mean here, I'm going to declare a variable. I'm going to make this a let. I'm going to say let my name. And I'm going to say that this is going to be equal to Lathe, like so. Now over here, I'm going to go ahead and reassign my name to my age, which is 25. Now, if we weren't using TypeScript, let me just get rid of this for now. You can see, and save that, you can see that this is actually a-okay. This is completely fine. Now, if we go back and we add TypeScript again, now this is actually not fine. We get this squiggly line. And if we go over here, you can see that it's saying that the type number is not assignable to type string. So because what we did here was we declared that this is going to be equal to Lathe, the string Lathe, it gave this the type of string. And that's basically how it assigned it. So it was like let my name colon string. And we can also explicitly say that this is going to be of type string, like so. And now what we're doing is we're trying to reassign that to a number, and TypeScript is yelling at us. So we can't do this. And this is really good because, of course, we don't often want to change types. So over here, we can do this. And if we set something like 23, then now it's going to yell at us saying that this is equal to 23 when it should be a string. So over here, that is going to give us a little bit of extra security and maintain the integrity of our code base. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to define the type of this state object. So just for now, I'm going to just duplicate this object. I'm going to say const object. And I'm going to say that this is going to be equal to an empty object. And I'm going to try to give it the exact same type as we have over here. Now, in order to define a type of an object, TypeScript gives us this very important thing called interface. So this is going to allow us to define the type of an object. So we're going to say interface, and I'm going to call this, well, whatever it is that we want to call it. So I'm going to call this option state, because that's what we're trying to define, the option state, and we're going to do curly braces. Now, right in here, we're going to define the type of each key value pair. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say that, hey, there is going to have a key, and that's going to be called gender, and this is going to have a type of string. And then we do semicolons. We're also going to say that this object should have a popularity key, and it should have a value of string. And lastly, we should have a length key that has also a value of string. And now what we can do is we can actually apply this interface to this object. So we can say colon and then options state. And right away, you can see that we're getting a little bit of issues telling us, hey, we do not have the gender or popularity or length keys right over here. So now what we can do is we can apply gender, and you can see right away we're actually getting this cool autofill. And that's because it understands the type. So we can say gender, you can just put whatever string that we want in here. Let's just say girl for now. And then over here, we can say something like length, and we can say all. And then lastly, the popularity is going to be unique, like so. So right away, you can see that now it's happy with us. And if we added an additional property like milk is equal to true, it's going to yell at us because it's saying that, hey, this isn't part of the type right over here. We didn't define this. So if this was indeed a property that we wanted to add, we would have to explicitly go to the interface and then define here that we want to have a property called milk that is a Boolean. And that pretty much means that, yes, we indeed want to do this. Now, of course, we don't want to do this. So let's just go ahead and get rid of that. So that solves problem number 1. But what is problem number 2? Well, problem number 2 is we're defining that this is going to be a very generic string. So we could, if we wanted to over here, instead of saying maybe length of all, we can say length of medium. And that's actually not an option that we support. We only have short, long, or all of them. but we don't have this medium option. Now, maybe another engineer that's not very familiar with this app, they could add this in there, and that's completely fine with TypeScript. So what we could do is we need to actually explicitly say the different types of strings that we can have for a specific key. Now in TypeScript, there's another thing that we can utilize called an enum to define this. So we're going to say enum gender, and we're going to do curly braces. And then right in here, we're going to define all of the different options that we have for a particular gender option. So over here, I'm going to say gender, and then I'm going to say something like girl. And this is all going to be in capital. We can actually assign that to the value of the string value of girl like so. Then I'm going to do comma. And it's all in capital just because it's just a common convention. We're going to say boy. And then over here, we're going to say unisex. And that's going to be equal to unisex, like so. And then now what we can do is we can actually grab this enum. And instead of saying that this is going to be a generic string, we can just define that this is going to be of type gender. So now, instead of saying string girl, we'll say gender dot girl like so. Now we can actually do the exact same thing for the popularity. So popularity as well as the length. So for the popularity, we are going to, I forgot the options. I think it was trendy. And then also over here, I forgot the option for this again. I think it was unique. Unique, like so. So let's go ahead and change the value of those as well. So we're going to say trendy. And then unique. And then over here for the length, we're going to have short is equal to short. Short, like so. We're also going to have long. That's equal to long. And lastly, we're going to have all. And that's equal to all, like so. So over here, what we can do is say popularity. And then over here, we can say length. So again, now, if you want to specify something, you're going to have to explicitly say length dot whatever it is. You don't have the option to add length dot medium. You only have these options right over here. So that ensures that, well, we're going to pick the right thing. So trendy, like so. So there we go. So this is really, really good. Now, of course, the application is working the way expected because we didn't apply these types over here. So what I want to do is actually want to get rid of this object. This was just like kind of a test object. We don't really need that. But what I want to do is I want to grab this type and apply it to this reactive state. In order to do that, you might be thinking we can just do, well, the same thing that we did over here. So we could do just colon and then that. But that's actually not how it works. And to prove it to you, let's just go back, get that object that we had before. Let's copy that and let's paste that in there. And then over here, let's do colon and then this. Actually, well, I guess that does work. But the way that I prefer doing it is over here, right in the reactive. What you can do is you can add these brackets, these triangle brackets, and then you can add the state right in there. And that accomplishes the exact same thing. So now, again, if you decided to put in like a random string, it's going to yell at us. Let's go ahead and save this. And right now you can see it's actually working the exact same way because these values over here, they correspond to these values right here. Now, to actually make this a little bit better, what we can do is we can actually grab these enums and we can utilize them inside of these classes. So instead of saying that the options.gender is equal to the string boy, we can say that this is going to be equal to gender dot and then boy like so. And this should work a-okay. So this should work the exact same way. So over here, we can say gender dot unisex. And then over here, gender dot girl. And if we save that, again, it's working the exact same way. Girl is still highlighted over here. So let's go ahead and actually do that in here as well. So we're going to say option, or sorry, this is going to be popularity, the enum popularity dot, this is, which one is this one? Trendy. Okay. And then let's just copy that in. And we're going to say unique here. Unique. And let's go right over here. We're going to say length dot. And over here, we're going to say long. Let's grab that. We're going to say all over here. So length dot all. And then lastly, we're going to say length dot shorts. Okay. So again, works exactly the same way. So this is looking great, and I hope you guys actually learned quite a bit about TypeScript when doing this. And the reason why we would want to utilize TypeScript is it's very, very powerful and important to utilize. In this video, what we're going to do is very simply start updating the state when we click on a particular button. So this should be relatively easy to accomplish. So what I'm going to do here is let's just start off with this button right here. When you click on this button, we should change the gender from gender.girl to gender.boy. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go ahead and add this @click. So @click event listener. And as soon as we click, what we want to do is we want to grab the options. So we're going to say options. So options, like so. We're going to say .gender. We're going to say that that is going to be equal to gender.boy. And that's pretty much all it is that we need to do. So what this should do is actually change the state and thus the background color. Let's give this a quick test. And well, it actually changed this state over here. However, this background color has not changed. So another reason for that is because it's boy, capital, like so. So just refresh that. And now, there we go. Now it's working the way that we expect it to. So just go ahead and copy this a few times. And this time we're going to say unisex for this. So unisex. And for this, we're going to say girl. And then let's scroll down a little bit more. And over here, this time we're going to change the popularity. So popularity. We're going to say that this is going to be popularity.trendy. Let's go ahead and copy that. And then over here, we're going to say unique. Okay. And over here, I think we should have this as 3, not as 2, because I believe this is 2. So right over here, let's go ahead and copy this once more. This time we're going to change the length. So we're going to say options.length. It's going to be length.long. Let's go ahead and copy that one more time. We're going to say over here, options.length. This is going to be all. And the last thing is short. So this should change our state the way that, well, we intend it to. So if we go over here, now we have the option to just click on whatever it is that we want, and it will change the state as well as the background colors. In this video, what we're going to do is add a button right over here that is going to compute all of the different names based on the categories and options that we have selected. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to add that button. So what I want you to do is I want you to go right over here to the options container, click on that div. Now options, not option with the S. Click on that div, scroll all the way down. And then right over here between this div and this div, we're going to add that button. And this is going to be, well, find names like so. So over here you can see we have that button. Now let's go ahead and style this a little bit. I'm going to give this like a class of primary, like a primary button. So over here, let's go ahead and add some of those primary styles. So let's go ahead and do just that. So the first thing I'm going to do is apply a nice background color. I'm going to say RGB, and then I'm going to say 24987, and then 89. I'm going to say the color is going to be white. I'm going to say the border radius is going to be around 6.5 rems. And then what we're going to do is we're going to give this a border of none, a padding of 0.75 rems, and also 4 rems. We're also going to give it a font size of 1 rem, a margin top of, let's say, 1 rem, and a cursor pointer. That's pretty much all it is that we need. And there we go. How pretty is that? So that's looking really good. Okay, so now what do we want to do? Well, when we click on this button, what I want to do is I want to compute all of the different names that, belong into the categories that were selected. So what I'm going to do just for now, instead of showing those cards, what I'm going to do is I am going to create another piece of state, because at the end of the day, this is state. And I'm going to call this names. So I'm going to call this piece of state names like so. And instead of this being reactive, I'm going to use ref, because this is just going to be a simple array. So I'm going to say ref, and then this is going to be an array. Now, it's actually also a good thing to define the type of the array, because right now we could have an array of numbers, we could have an array of strings, we could have whatever it is that we want. And just to prove that to you, we could do names dot push, and we can push in a string like so. Or sorry, we can't do that. We say dot value, and then over here we can say dot push, and we can push in a string. And we can also do names dot value dot push, and we can also push in a number, and that's fine. That's a-okay. However, obviously we don't want to do this. We only want to push in a string, which is the name itself. So we need to define a type. Now, how do we define an array type? Well, that's pretty easy. So we're going to say string because we want it to be a string, but we also want it to be an array of strings. So we say string and then just brackets, specifying that this is going to be an array of strings. So now you can see here, it's yelling at us, telling us that, hey, we need to pass a string in, not a number. Okay, so that's looking good. So now that we have our state, and actually maybe a better name for this is something like selected names, or you know what, we'll just keep it as names. I think that's a-okay. So now what we need to do is we need to start computing the names. So what I want you to do is I want you to go to my GitHub page, and I'll have the link in the description below. And what we're going to need to do is grab a list of all of the different names. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to my repository. You guys do not have to do this. I'm going to have the link in the description below. And over here I have if I go over here I have this data, and right over here I have this names.ts. Let me just zoom in here a little bit. So names.ts, and right over here we have a bunch of different names that we can utilize. So I'm going to go ahead and copy all of these different names. So all of these different names are objects. They have an ID. There's the name itself, and then over here I specify the category that this belongs to. So this name right over here, it's a girl name. It's very trendy and it's long. Right over here, this is a girl name, trendy, and it's short. So we have just an array of different names that we have. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy all of this. So I'll copy all of that. And I'm going to create, right in here, I'm going to create a data.ts file. This is where we're going to store that data. Now, right over here, notice that I actually already have the enums right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grab these enums, because these enums use the capitalization, and I actually prefer that. So over here, we're going to say, we're going to utilize those enums. Now, what we need to do is, because we have these enums here and they're being used here, we don't want to, of course, duplicate them in here as well, because this is just not code duplicity. So instead, what we're going to do here is we're going to export each one of these enums like so. And then we're going to import them into this file. So let's just go ahead and get rid of this. Now in here, we're going to say import, and then from, and then we can say from at. So this is going to be the root directory, then slash data. And then over here, we're going to say, I want to import gender. I want to import popularity. I also want to import the length. So let's go ahead and save that. So now we have imported the enums. Now the names also have a type. I have defined the type over here. So this is right here saying that the names is going to be an array of this interface, and I defined this interface right over here, which is going to have an ID, a name, and then over here the gender should actually be the enums themselves. So we're going to say gender like so, and then popularity is going to be popularity, and then length is going to be length. There we go. So that should be okay. So now what we can do is we can actually get the names as well. So this is the data. This is the array that we're going to utilize and iterate over and eventually figure out, how we want to filter it for our specific options. Now this is going to give us an error because, well, we have names here and we also have names over here. So I'm going to also say here that this is going to be called something like selected names, just so we don't have that little mismatch. Okay, so this is looking really, really good. So now what we're going to do is, for the selected names, for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to display it right in the bottom. So right over here, right after this, I'm just going to display the selected names. And now if we go all the way over here, if I were to zoom in a little bit, you can see it's an empty array. Now what I want to do is when I click this button, I actually want to perform the computation that is going to populate this with a bunch of different strings. So let's actually do that computation in the next video. In this video, what we're going to do is actually compute the names based on the option state that we have. So what I want to do is right over here, when we click this button, I'm going to add a click handle, event handler. And when I call this, or when I click this button, what I want to do is I want to call a function called compute selected names, like so. So let's go all the way right over here and let's actually define that function. So I'm going to say const compute selected names, and that's just going to be a regular arrow function. So now what we want to do here in this function is figure out all of the names that belong to the category that our state is currently in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const filtered names, and I'm going to say that this is going to be equal to the names array that we have over here, and then I'm going to say dot filter. So I want to filter this array. So the first filter is going to be filter by the gender. So right over here, let's define a callback that's going to grab every single name. And then, well, what I want to do is I want to check the name.gender. So I want to see what that name.gender is. Remember, each name has a gender. And I only want to return it if the name.gender triple equals what we have, the options.gender. So right now we have all of the options being girls. So we're only going to return all of the girls at that point. And it's going to return to us an array. So let's just go ahead and save that for now. Now, because this is going to return to us an array, we can actually apply another dot filter and do the exact same thing with popularity. So over here, let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to grab the name, and then what we're going to do is we're going to say name dot, and this time popularity. We want to check that the options is going to be options dot popularity, like so. There we go. And this is going to now return us all of the different names that belong to this group right over here. So girl as well as trendy. Now, the last thing that we want to do is, well, get the length. The length is going to be a little bit more complicated because if we supply all, we just want to get all of the names that are still there, regardless if they're short or long. So now what we're going to do is just apply another dot filter. Let's have a callback function like so. This time we're going to use curly braces because we're going to have multiple lines here. So what I'm going to say is if options, so if the option dot length triple equals length dot all, Then what we're going to do is just very simply just return true. Because at the end of the day, what this is returning is a Boolean value. So each time we iterate through a particular name, we are either returning true or false on whether we want to have that into the new filtered array. So if it's all, then we just want to return true. It doesn't matter if they're short or long. Else, then what we want to do is we want to return name dot length. We're going to say here that this is equal to options dot length. Now, if this doesn't make sense to you, this filter callback and what we're doing, I highly suggest maybe watching a video or reading some documentation. I do expect you to know this if you are trying to learn Nuxt. So this is just kind of vanilla JavaScript that you should probably know as a prerequisite. Okay, so what this is going to do is going to give us all of the names. And then what we want to do is now assign this state to the filtered names. So over here, I'm going to say selected names dot value is equal to, I'm going to call this filtered names. I'm going to say filtered names. Now right away, this is the power of TypeScript. Right over here, we define that this is going to be an array of strings. However, if I hover over this, well, now this is actually an array of names, not an array of strings. So this could have been an innocent mistake that we definitely would have done, but with TypeScript, we were able to catch it. So now what I can do is I can actually do a dot map. So I can iterate over this and return another array. And over here, I can just very simply just say, I want to return the name dot name right over here. So I'm going to say name dot name like so, and that's just going to give us an array of strings. Okay, so let's actually go ahead and give this a quick test. So I'm going to say boy, I'm going to say short, and I'm going to say unique. Let's go ahead and do this, and now you can see we get Lath, Lamello, Selma, and Asher. And if I actually went over here, so Lamello is short and unique and is a boy. We get, what else do we have? We had Lath somewhere in there, right here. We got Asher, boy, unique, short, and what was the last one? Selma, wherever that is, right here. Okay, now we can of course do the same thing for something else now. So we can go say girl, trendy, all. We get Olivia, Brooklyn, Zoe, Valentina, Josine, Maya, Ivy, whatever. So this is good. So you can see that this is actually working the way that we expected. But now what I want to do is I want to iterate over this array and render cards. Obviously, I don't want to render an array. This isn't a very nice user experience. I actually want to render cards. So let's go ahead and do that in the next video. The next step in our process is to convert this array of names into nice looking cards. So let's actually go ahead and do that right now. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is right below the div, so this div right over here that contains all of the different options, so the options container, right below it, I'm going to create another div, and I'm going to give it a class of cards container. So I'm going to say cards container. So this is going to house all of the different name cards. Now right in here, this is where we're going to have all of our cards. So I'm going to create a div for this, for each individual card. I'm going to give this a class of card like so. And then right in there, we're going to have the p tag for the card. Now what we're going to do is we're going to actually iterate over this, of course. So in order to do this, we're going to use a v4. And we're going to say v4 name in selected names. And then we're going to need to provide a key. So each name should be unique, so the name should serve as the key as well. And then right over here, we are going to supply it with the name itself. So if you go over here, you should see our names. Now, of course, they're not styled nicely, so let's go ahead and apply these styles. So the first thing that I'm going to do is for this cards container, which is going to be the container that contains everything, I'm going to go over here. And I am going to give this a display of flex. And then I'm going to give this a margin top of 3 rems. And lastly, a flex wrap of wrap, just so it can wrap nice and well. Okay, so that is looking a-okay. I'm actually pretty happy with that. But now what we need to do is start styling the cards themselves. So let's go over here. We're going to say card. And then right over here, we're going to say the background color. This is going to be RGB. RGB. We're going to say 276138. So nice little blue color there. We're going to give this a width of 28%. So 28%. So we can have around, I believe, maybe 3 per row. So 28%. We're also going to give this a color of white. We're going to give this a border radius of 1 rem, padding of 1 rem, a margin left, or a margin right rather, of 0.5 rem. And then we're going to give it a margin bottom of 1 rem. So margin bottom of 1 rem. And I think that should be it for the card themselves. Now let's go ahead and style the P tag inside of the card. So this is just going to be, let's give this over here a position of relative. And I'll show you exactly why we need this later. It's just really to style that X button, which I'll show a little bit later. But for now, we'll say this one's position absolute. And then over here, we're going to say that this is going to be top negative 30%. And we're also going to say left. This is going to be 95.5%. We're going to say here cursor. That's going to be pointer. And over here, the color is going to be an RGBA. And then over here, we're going to have just all black. But because it's an RGBA, I'm also going to specify, some opacity. So you might be thinking, why did we do this? Well, the reason why we did this is because inside of here, so inside of this right here, we're going to actually have that X. So that X where that's going to allow us to close. And I want that to be in the top right corner. And so that's why we did all those extra additional, position relative and stuff like that. So right over here, what we're going to do is inside of the HTML, the name itself is actually going to live just outside of the card. And then right over here inside of the P tag, we're just going to have that X like so. And we could even wrap this in maybe like an H4 and put that in there like that. Okay, so now you can see that we're getting our things. Now this is a little bit bigger than I thought it would be. So let's go over here to this. And let's look at why it's too big. The padding 0.1 rem. I think that's what I meant to do. Okay. And you can see here we have this little X. Maybe we can even just make it negative 29%. And there we go. You can see very faintly we have that X. So now if we go ahead and we start clicking on all these different things, as you can see, it's working the way that we expect it to. So this is really, really good. Maybe all here. You can see we get all of our different options. So this is looking really, really good. However, obviously there's still quite a bit of flaws with this. Let's go ahead and remove this. So the first flaw that you might see right away is that these X's don't work. So they don't allow us to actually delete this. So we need to fix that later. But there's also some other issues with the way that we structured our code that I'm going to try to resolve in the next videos. In the last video, I mentioned that the way that we structured our code is not ideal. In this video, I'm going to explain exactly what I mean by that. So what do I mean by that? Well, in order to understand, let's actually look at this div and all of the HTML elements inside of it. So the div with the option container. So we have this div right over here. And then inside of this div, we have this H4 that has the title of the option. And then right over here, we also have this div that is going to house all of the buttons. And then we have all of the button options. All of them have relatively the same class. Now, if we go over here, let's go all the way to the bottom, you can see that we actually have another option container. And similarly, the HTML structure is exactly the same. We have an h4, and then we also have this buttons option div, and then we have buttons inside of it. Now, the number of buttons might be different, but we still have buttons with the same structure nonetheless. And the same thing applies over here. So we have the div, we have the h1, we have the container, we have the buttons. So you can see here that we are reusing this HTML template multiple times throughout our application. Now, this is causing a lot of code duplication. And when we have something like this, what is this a good candidate for? Well, it's a good candidate to put it into a component and then just pass the necessary data that it needs via props. So what do I mean by that? Well, why don't we actually just place this over here, this whole div inside of a component, and just pass the data that it needs. What data does it need? Well, it needs to have the title, and it also needs to have the button data. So let's actually take a look at a quick diagram to understand this. So right now we have three different option containers. So we can just have three different components, and then we can just iterate over them. And for each component, we can just give it a title that is going to be choose gender, and then we can give it an array of the different buttons, and then we can just give each button value. So gender.boy, gender.unisex, gender.girl. Now over here we can do the exact same thing and input it for space reasons, but over here we can also have choose the length, and then we can have all of the different lengths. And that's really all it is that we need to pass. Another thing that we also will need to pass is the option state, and we already have that here, so we can just go ahead and pass that in relatively easily. So let's actually go ahead and create a component for this and start passing in the data that is necessary, and that's really going to clean up our code. Right now, let's actually take a look at how long our code is. It's around 205 lines of code for this app.view file, and let's just see exactly how much shorter it gets once we finish writing this component. So let's just keep a quick note here that it was 205. So let's just write a comment, 205. I'm not sure if that's a comment. Maybe you can put the comment here, 205 lines of code. Okay, so let's just go ahead and do this right now. Now, the way that we build components in Nuxt is a little bit differently. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a directory called components. I already created this. Let me actually delete it and just do it again with you guys. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a directory, not in the node modules, in the root directory. We're going to create a directory called components. And it has to be called components because any file that lives in here, any view file that lives in here, Nuxt is going to detect that as a component and is going to give it a special ability that we usually don't get with just plain old view. So right over here, I am going to create a component. So I'm going to create an option.view file. And then right over here, I'm going to define a template. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab one of the option containers. So I'm going to go over here and let's just grab, that's the options container. Let's just grab one of these option containers. Zoom over here. Let's grab that. And let's paste that here. And now let's start passing in some of this data. So we need to pass in some data as props. So what I'm going to do actually, inside of the app.view, I'm going to create an array with all of the different option data. So over here, I'm going to create options array. And then over here, these are going to be all of the different options. So the first option is we're going to have an object here. It's going to have a title of choose a gender. And then we're going to specify all of the different buttons over here. So we're going to say gender.girl. Then we're going to say gender.unisex. We're also going to say gender.boy. dot boy. Now, another thing that we also have to pass in is exactly what category this falls in, because the button eventually is going to update the option dot gender or option dot popularity or option dot length. So I have to specify what category does this option fall in. So I'm going to say over here that this falls in category gender. So the gender category. And that's really all it is that we need. So now let's go over here and let's add now. So this is going to be the popularity. So choose the name's popularity. So popularity. And then over here, this is going to update the popularity. And then over here, we're going to have our array of buttons. So obviously, this is going to be popularity dot, let's say, trendy. And then over here, we only have 2 buttons. So it's going to be popularity dot unique. Let's save that. 1 more left. Let's just copy what we have here. Paste that in there. And then right over here, we're going to say 3. And we are going to say, choose the name's length. So choose name's length. And this is going to be length. That's the category that we want to update. Remember, we want to update this category when we click on a specific button. And then over here, we're going to say length dot, let's do short. And over here, we're going to do length dot, so length dot all. And then over here, length dot long. Length dot, oh, that's gender. Obviously, we want length here. I was wondering why that wasn't showing up. Okay, so now we have our array. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all of the different option containers that we have. So I'm going to go over here to the options container. I'm going to scroll all the way down to this div. And then all the other divs up until the options container, I'm just going to delete all the HTML elements. So over here, let's just delete all that. And what I'm going to do now is I am just going to display the option component. Now you might be wondering exactly how are we going to display the option component? Do we need to import it? Do we need to define it? No, actually all we need to do is just display it like this. And this right here is going to have the same exact name as we called it right over here in the view file. So what actually ends up happening is because we put our component in the components directory, Nuxt is smart enough to auto import it in. So if this wasn't called components, we wouldn't have this ability, but we can just auto import it in without having any manual imports ourselves. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a v4. So we're going to iterate over the options array. So for each option, so option in options, and then we're going to need to supply a key. So let's just say option.title. That's always going to be unique. And that's exactly how we are going to display it. And right away, you can see that we went from 205 lines of code to 153 lines of code. That's because now we just removed a huge block of our HTML that was relatively unnecessary. We should have definitely had it somewhere else. Now, of course, if we go to our web page and I do a quick refresh, you can see it's not going to work. And that's because now what we need to do is start passing in some props. And once we pass in the props, then we can go ahead and start populating this data accordingly. So let's actually go ahead and do that in the next video. So now that we have created this component, let's start passing in the necessary data via props. So we need to just pass in pretty much everything that we have here, which is actually stored in this option object. So very simply, in order to do this, we can just say : option is equal to option like so. So that's going to be the first thing that we're going to pass in, and that's pretty much going to deal with the title as well as the button values as well as the category. Now we also need the options state. Well, this is relatively easily can be easily done as well. All we can do here is just say options, and then this can be options like so, which is going to correspond to our option state over here. So that is actually all it is that we need to pass in to our component. But now what we need to do is accept those props and then utilize them inside of our template. So over here, I'm going to go ahead and just write a script tag. Let's get rid of all of this stuff. We're going to say script setup. We're also going to say that the language is going to be TypeScript, of course. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to get access to these props. Now with script setup, we have this thing called define props that we can auto import. And then right over here, we invoke it. And then inside of an object, we typically describe the type of the props. So over here, we're expecting an option, and that's going to be an object. And then over here, we can also say options, and that's also going to be an object, like so. So just as a quick clarification, the option is going to be just one of these objects in this array, so it could be this. And then the options object is going to be all of these right over here. So our state. So it's going to be an object and it's going to be an object. However, the issue with this that I find is that, this is very, very generic and it's not really going to give us a lot of good typing. So because we're using TypeScript, we actually don't necessarily have to do it this way. Instead, what we can do is we can actually utilize an interface to define the types of our props. So over here, I can say something like interface, and I can say option props. And then over here, I can say option, and I can say over here that this option key is also going to be an object. It's going to have a title. The title is going to be a string. Over here, it's also going to have a category. The category is going to be a string. And then it's going to have a set of buttons. And this is going to be an array. So it's going to be an array with either all gender items, all popularity items, or all length items. So over here, what we can actually do is we can say gender, and we can actually auto import that in. So over here, we can auto import imports gender from @data. We can say that this is going to be either an array of gender enum values, or let's go ahead over here and grab popularity. Let's also grab length. So over here we can say or it's going to be an array of popularity enum values, or it's going to be an array of length enum values. So that's just one thing that we can do to specify that it could be either one or the other. Now over here, let's also define what the options is going to look like. So the options is going to look like we're going to have a key that is going to be gender. That's going to be a value of gender. We're also going to have popularity. That's going to have a value of popularity. And then length. That's going to have the value of length. And now, instead of defining it like we did before, we can just use those curly or these triangle brackets right over here. Right in there, we can define our props. So now what we can do, if we do props dot, you can see that it knows exactly what is going to be in there, and it knows exactly what that type is. So that's just another, and I think a better way of defining our props. Okay, so this is looking really good. So now let's actually utilize those props inside of our template. So the first thing that I want to do here is I want to get rid, and actually let's just go ahead and comment out the buttons for now, just so we can see our progress. I'm going to comment them out. And then right over here, I'm just going to go ahead and save this and refresh. And now you see here that we have 3 choose your genders. Why do we have that? Because we're iterating over this array. So this array has 3 elements, so we have 3 different iterations, and we're rendering this options component 3 different times. And right now, inside of the options component, we basically just have an h1 with this hard-coded text. So you can see that this works. But now what I actually want to do instead is I want to access the props.title. Now inside of the template, we actually don't have to say props.option.title. Instead, what we can very simply use is just the object, the key inside of the prop itself. So what I mean by that is we don't have to do props.option.title. Instead, we can actually forego the props itself and just say option.title. Now, if we did that, you can very quickly see we have choose your gender, choose your popularity. Let me zoom in here once more, and choose your name length. So it's working a-okay. Now let's go ahead and start rendering some of these buttons. Now the buttons are going to be a little bit more complicated, and I'll show you why in a bit. But really here, what we want to do is we just want to iterate. We just want to have one button, and we want to render a button for every single element that we have in this array. So let's go ahead over here, and what we're going to do is we're going to add a v4. So we're going to say v4 is equal to, and then over here, what we're going to do is we're going to grab the value, because this is going to be either, gender dot boy, gender dot whatever. I'm going to call that the value. I'm going to say in option dot button. Is that what we called it here? Option dot buttons. And then, of course, we need to give it a key. And over here, the key could be value because that is going to be unique. Okay, so we're going to do this iteration. And then what we're going to do for the text is we're going to render the value itself. So remember, the value is indeed going to be an enum, but it actually corresponds to a text if you want to render it. And it's going to correspond to the text that we want, which is girl, boy, or unisex. So we're going to render that value in here. And then right over here, what we're going to do is we're going to utilize the options from our props. That's okay. And then over here, what we're going to do is instead of hard coding gender dot boy, we're going to say if that's equal to the value. And over here, we're going to say that that is also going to be equal to the value. And then over here, this could be popularity, this could be gender, this could be length. So over here, what we're going to say is that this is going to be option dot category like so. So option dot category. And there we go. I think that should be it, and everything should be working the way that we expect it to. Let's go ahead and save that. And now there we go. You can see that it is working. Now the problem is, and you probably can guess what the problem is here now, is that the styling is scoped to the app.view file, and that's where our styles currently live. So what we need to do is now just create another style sheet that is going to be scoped, and what we need to do is just grab all of these options, all of these classes. So the options container can stay in here, but almost everything else, so the option container, the option buttons, the option active, all that we can just pretty much cut it out, save it here, and then paste it right in there. So there we go. So now that's looking a-okay. So let's actually go and give this a quick test. And now, of course, you can see right away we have this one huge issue when it comes to the styling. We'll fix that later, but let's just check if this works. So if I click on this, this should change the state in the app.view, and it does. So that is looking good. Let's just pick boy, unique, long, and we click on that, we get these. Okay, I'm assuming this is right. Harrison, and maybe Harrison's not that unique, but whatever this name is, this is definitely unique. I'm going to try to pronounce it just for you guys. I suck at pronouncing names. Bartholomew. Okay. I give up. But you can see here where it is working a-okay. But right now we're getting a huge problem when it comes to the styling. Because right now what we're doing actually is we're hard coding the option left. So what we need to do is we actually need to figure out a way to exactly compute what the class should be. So let's actually do that in the next video. In this video, what we're going to do is we're going to solve this styling issue that we are facing currently. So you can see right now, everything has a border radius to the left, which is not what we want. Instead, what we want is a border radius to the left for the leftmost button and no border radius for anything in the middle. And then at the very rightmost button, we should have a border radius to the right. So if you're thinking right away, there actually is a way to accomplish this. So let's go over here to our app.view and let's look at these buttons over here. So very simply, what we can do here is we can check the index of the element that we are iterating over. So remember over here, we're iterating over the buttons. So the buttons right over here, and then we're rendering obviously a button for each one. Now what we can also do over here inside of our v4 is grab the index of the element that we are iterating over. So we can grab that index. Now over here we can check, okay, if the index is 0, that means it is going to be the leftmost button, and we need to apply the option left class. If it's somewhere in the middle, then we don't want to apply that. And if it's all the way to the right, meaning that it is the length of the array minus 1, because indexes work 0, 1, 2. This is going to be the length of 3. So minus 1 is going to be 2. That means that this is at the very end, and we should apply the option right class. So that is what we're going to need to do. We're going to need to create a function that is going to compute our class. However, it's a little bit more complicated because right over here, we're also doing another computation to determine the class. Right over here, we're computing if this is the active class, and then we're providing the option active. So we actually need to also include this right over here inside of our computation. So let's actually go ahead and create a function for this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a function, and I'm going to call this compute button classes like so. And this is going to take two values in, the value, and it's also going to take in the index. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to define all of the class names in an array. Because again, we could have multiple different class names that we want to add. For example, we could want to add, in this case, for example, we want to add the option left as well as the option active. However, for other ones, we might just want to add option left or option active only. But again, we could have multiple, or we could just have one. So if we have multiple, I just want to store them in an array. If we also have one, I'll just store that one element in that array as well. So the first thing that I want to do is let's actually just do this check right over here. And if this check right here is true, then I'm going to go ahead and push the option active into this array. So I'm going to say if, and I'm going to get access to the props here. So I'm going to say props. And then over here, I can pretty much just copy this check right over here. I can say if props, and then, so if props dot options, and then over here we can say props dot option dot category is equal to the value that we're going to pass in. Then what do I want to do? Well, I'm just going to say class name dot push. And then, of course, I'm going to push option active. Okay, so that's pretty much all it is that we need to do to handle the active class. Now what we want to do is we want to start handling the either option left or option right class. So this was actually pretty easy. This is where we're going to start using the index. So we're going to say if the index is equal to 0, that means this is going to be the leftmost button. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say class names dot push, and over here we're going to say option left. That's what we want to push. Now let's handle the rightmost button. So over here what we're going to do is we're going to say if index is equal to props dot option dot buttons dot length minus 1. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say class name dot push, and then over here we're going to say option right like so. So this is going to give us an array of different classes, but obviously we cannot put that array inside of our class. We need a string for this. So at the very end, what we're going to do after we've done all these if statement, all these conditional checks, what we're going to do is we're going to return class name and then dot join, and then we're going to join with a space. So what this is going to do is, let's say we have an array like this, option active, and then over here we have option left. What this is going to do is it's going to take this first element and it's going to put it inside of a string. So it's going to say option active, and then it's going to take this element and also put it in the string. But before it does that, it's going to apply whatever we put over here, which is a space. So it's going to say space and then option left. And that's exactly how we're going to apply classes. So over here, we can get rid of that. Now what we can do here is actually grab this compute button class, and right over here inside of this class, we can just invoke it and we can pass that value in as well as the index. So now if we come back here and do a quick refresh, let's do that little quick refresh. So it seems as though we have a little bit of a bug here. Let's see why that is. We're still getting some of that. We're still getting some radius to the left here. However, we're not getting anything here. We're not getting anything here. So it seems something in the middle is messing things up. So if the index is equal to 0, okay. So for some reason, we're hitting this block right here. So let's actually see why we're doing that. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to console. I know exactly why this is happening. We need to remove this right here. So let's go ahead and remove that. And there we go. So yeah, that was pretty much it. Yeah, I accidentally left that class there. But now there we go. So you can see that that is working. And let's just look at actually how much lines of code we saved. So we were at 201 and now we're at 129. And that's because now we extracted a lot of these HTML as well as CSS into their own file, which is going to make our code significantly more reusable. Okay, good friends, we have completely finished working on this component and I am pretty proud about it. Now what I want to do is something maybe a little bit simpler. Now what I want to do is I want to extract this right over here into its own component. So remember, this is the name card. So let's go over here, and usually what you would do is, well, you would create another file in here, and you can call this name card, or you can call this whatever it is that you want. However, let's say you want to create another directory in here. So maybe over here you want to create a card directory because you might have multiple cards in your application. And then right in here, you can say that this is going to be the name.view file. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and just grab this. So this is the component that we have, and I'm going to put it inside of a template. And then right now, just for now, let's remove all of this. And then over here, let's just put in lathe. And let's go ahead and add a little bit of style. So I'm going to move some of these styles here. So we need the card, we need the card P, and I believe that's all it is that we really need. Let's go ahead and save that. And now what I want to do is I want to render this component. So how are we going to do that? So I want to render it right over here. So you might be thinking, well, I can just say name like so, because that is the name of the file. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. I'm going to comment this out for now. So go ahead and save that, comment this out, and let me just go ahead and refresh, and you can see that we're not rendering anything. So why is that? Well, that's because we actually nested this name.view file inside of this card directory. So now if we want to auto import that in, what we should do is get the folder directory, so the name of this directory, and then also the name of the file. So if we want to render that, it's going to look something like this: card name. So again, the name of the directory and then the name of the file. So over here, we're going to go ahead and save that. And let's go back over here. And right away, you can see that it is working. Now, of course, we can have multiple directories, multiple nested directories. So for example, let's add another directory here, just saying hello, something like that. And then right over here, let's actually move that right in there. I'm just going to go ahead and let's just skip the changes. So I'm going to move this. So let's go ahead and add that directory again. So I'm going to say hello. Or where is that? It's saying it's there. Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, so it was actually in there, which is a little confusing for me. Now, if you go ahead and refresh, you can see that, well, now it's yelling at us about this. So over here, now what we're going to do is we're going to change card hello name. And there we go. You can see that it is working A-okay. So it's going to be this name plus this name plus this name. Now, obviously, I don't want this. I'm going to move it right back. Skip the changes. And I am going to get rid of this hello directory. And I'm going to move this right back to card name. Okay. So there we go. You can see it is working fine. Okay, so this is looking really good. But now what we need to do is we need to start passing in some data. So we're going to iterate over this. So we're going to iterate over this card name. So we're going to have a v4 in here. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and just pass in the name. And the name is just going to be a string. So it's going to be a unique string. Let's go ahead and do that. Now over here, we need to accept it. So inside of our script tag, I'm just going to go ahead, script, get rid of all this junk. I'm going to say over here, script setup lang is equal to TypeScript. And then right over here, we're going to very similarly accept the props. So let's go over here. We're going to say props is going to be equal to define props. And over here, let's define an interface for this. I'm going to say something like name props. So name props. And this is only going to have a string, or sorry, a name that is going to be a string. That's all it's going to have. So let's go ahead and copy that in there. And now, because we have defined the props, right over here, we can actually have our actual name. So you can say name like so. So now let's go ahead and do that, and it is not working. So why is that not working? We got name here. What I'm going to do just to double check is console.log the props. Let's console.log the props just to see exactly what we are getting. So we're going to say console. Go to the console here. We're getting a proxy. I'm just going to go ahead and refresh this. Search. Okay. Search. I'm not sure exactly what happened before, but now it's working. So I'm honestly flustered why that happened before, but now you can see that it is working a-okay. I probably just needed to refresh. So that's pretty much it. And this lesson was really mainly about how we can deal with components that are nested in other directories. And now you guys know exactly how that works. So we're almost pretty much done this application. The only thing that we need to do now is figure out exactly how we can start deleting different names that we are not interested in. So let's actually figure out how we can do that in the next video. The last thing that we need to do is make this delete button functional. So when we click on it, it should delete that particular name. However, the issue that we have right now is that delete button lives inside of the name.view. However, when we click on this, it needs to affect this array right over here, which lives inside of the app.view. So if this doesn't make much sense to you, let's look at a diagram. So right now, the app.view, it houses the array of selected names. And then the name.view, it doesn't have any of those arrays. Instead, it just has that one name that it is supposed to show. Now, it has no reference to this array, and thus how are we going to update it? Well, we can update it one of two ways. We can go ahead and pass that array to the name and then just go ahead and update it in there. Or what we can do, and this is probably a better idea, we can emit an event. So right inside of the app.view, we can create this remove name function. So we can have this remove function, and we can call this function anytime the name.view emits a remove event. And once it emits this remove event, it's going to also pass in that name. We can catch that name inside of the parameter and then just remove that name entirely from the array. So let's actually go ahead and implement this. So let's actually go over here, right to the card name. And what we want to do is we want to say that we are going to listen to a remove event. So right over here, we're going to say @remove. And as soon as, we emit a remove event, I'm going to call a callback function that is going to call a function that we haven't created yet called remove name. And then it's also going to pass in the index of that particular element. So let's go over here and let's go all the way to the script and let's actually create that function. So let's go right over here. I think this is pretty good. Maybe right here, right below the actual state. We're going to create that remove name function. And then this is going to take in the index, of course. And this index, let's define it as a number, just for TypeScript's sake. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say the filtered names. So what we want to do is we want to get basically all of the names except the name that lies in this index. So we can say filtered names is equal to, and we can say a brand new array. And we can say selected names.value. So this is just basically destructuring the current array into a brand new array. But then what we need to do now is very simply do a filtered name dot splice. And then over here, we're going to say at that particular index and then 1. So whatever this index is at, we want to essentially splice that out. And we just want to splice out one element at that index. So we're just going to splice out that particular index entirely. And then very simply, we're going to say selected names dot value is equal to filtered names. So that's really all it is that we need to do from the app.view side. There's one last thing that we also need to do. Right over here, we also need to pass the index. So right over here, we can say index. And then over here, we can say index is equal to. So index is equal to index like so. Okay, so that's all it is that we need. And then inside of the name.view, now what we need to do is start emitting events. So let's go ahead and do that. So right here, what we're going to say is const, and then this is going to be emit, is equal to define emits. So over here, we're just going to define all of the different emissions that we can do. Now, right now, we can only do a remove event because that's exactly what we defined right over here. So we're going to say remove. And then over here, we're going to create another function. So we're going to call this remove name. And this function is very simply going to emit a remove event. So we're going to call emit. We're going to say remove. And then as a parameter, we're going to pass in the props.index. So let's go over here and actually define that we also get an index. So over here, we're going to say props.index like so. Now, all it is that we need to do is right over here, we're going to say @click, and we're just going to call the function remove name like so. So that's pretty much all it is that we need to do. So let's just give this a quick refresh. Let's just get a bunch of names here. And if we're not interested in them, as you can see, now they're getting deleted. So all these different names are getting deleted like so. Now, of course, we can click on it again and just get the names back and then delete them again. But that works a-okay. So I hope you guys learned exactly how we can start emitting events, communicating from the child to the parent and actually manipulating the state there. And that is actually going to conclude our project. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And now let's actually go ahead and move on to bigger and better. Hello, my good friends. Welcome to a brand new section. In this section, we are going to be building a project that is going to be a little bit more involved. And in this project, we are truly going to see the powers of Nuxt.js. In the last section, we used Nuxt.js to build our baby generator application, but I bet you didn't really see if it was worth it. Did we really get a lot out of it? I think the only thing that we really got out of it is the auto importation of the components. Now, I only did that just so we can get a view refresher and a little bit of an introduction to Nuxt, but that wasn't a great example of showing you the true powers of Nuxt over just pure Vue development. So this project is going to show you how much easier it's going to be to build certain applications with Nuxt.js over Vue. So let me just quickly go ahead and demo this project, and then we're going to talk about some of the things that we are going to learn. So right over here, we have this landing page. We're going to be building an application called Restaurantly, something like that. And we have this nav bar, so it seems as though we have navigation. So once we go over here, we click on View Top Restaurants, we get redirected to another page, and this is going to be the /restaurants path. And it's just going to show us the top 50 ranking restaurants across the world. So you can see here, one's McDonald's, two Starbucks, Taco Bell, blah, 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 etc. You guys get the point. But even better, what we can do if we wanted to is actually click on a particular restaurant. So I can click on Wendy's, for example, and then I get some more information about Wendy's. So I get this picture just showing Wendy's off. We get the title over here. We get their annual revenue, which is $4 billion, and how many stores they have. And then we have some additional information here that is just very simply some lorem ipsum. We can also scroll down and we see this banner that says, hey, you know what? If you want a restaurant guide, go ahead and click buy now. Now this button doesn't do anything. I just have this here for the purpose of showing you a Nuxt feature, but it's there, so understand that. We also have navigation right over here, so we can go ahead and click on home. You can see here, maybe very faintly, that the color changes as soon as you navigate from tab to tab. So you can see home here, and then over here you can see that this one's a little bit whiter. The restaurant tab's a little bit wider, and when you click on home, this is a little bit wider as well. So this is what we are going to be building, and we are going to be learning some of the really important features of Nuxt.js. And if you try to develop this with Vue, you probably imagine that this is going to be relatively difficult. However, with Nuxt, we're going to get a lot of additional features. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the things that we are going to be learning in this project. So the first thing, and you probably imagine this, we're going to be learning how we can create pages in our web application. In the last project, we only had a baby generator, and that was just one very simple page. But now, as you can see, we have multiple pages across our app. So we're going to figure out how we can deal with pages inside of Nuxt.js. Another thing that we're going to talk about is layout. So the layout is the way we can lay out our page, lay out our HTML structure. So this might be a little bit confusing to explain right now, so we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to that point. Then we're going to talk about metadata. So how can we apply certain metadata to any single page? Again, if you're confused about this, you'll understand it once we get to that lecture. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is outside style sheets. So we're going to do some internal CSS styling, but I'm also going to start relying on some outside style sheets. Particularly, we're going to be using Bootstrap. So we're going to talk about how we can inject that style into our Nuxt application. So I hope that gets you guys excited. It does get me excited, and I'll see you guys in future lectures. Alright everybody, let's go ahead and get started with working on our restaurant application. Now for the first few videos, we're just going to work on the landing page. So we have the nav bar, as well as the restaurant.ly header, as well as that link that's going to navigate us to the top 50 restaurants page. So in order to do this, of course, we need to go ahead and create a brand new Nuxt application. To save some time, I already did this. But just as a refresher, if you are unfamiliar, you're going to navigate into whatever directory you want to create this application in. And then you're going to do npx nuxi and px nuxi. And then init, and then you're going to give your application a name. I called it O2 Top Restaurants. You can call it whatever it is that you want. Now, once you create this, what you want to do is you want to navigate into that application. So you can go over here and do cd, and then whatever you called it. I'm going to call it my name, for instance. And then once you navigate into it, you just do an npm install. And then open it up into your favorite text editor and then just do an npm run dev to have it running on your local machine. Okay, so that's pretty much it. And we're going to continuously do this so you will get used to it. Now, once you have that, you're going to have this, default application up and running. We can go ahead and remove this Nuxt welcome so we can just have no boilerplate right away. Now, I mentioned that for this application, we are going to do some custom styling, but I don't want to start focusing on styling too much. So what I want to do is I want to use an external library that is going to provide us with a bunch of styles that correspond to some custom classes. And the most popular one by far, and probably the one that you are also familiar with, is Bootstrap. So this is what we're going to be using. So Bootstrap is a library or a popular framework that is going to allow us to style our applications relatively quickly. So there's a bunch of UI elements, a bunch of layout elements that we can utilize. So for example, over here, we have a bunch of, we have a container class that's going to give us some styling to create a container. Now, how are we going to get this right over here, Bootstrap, connected to our Nuxt application? Well, the way to do it, and let me zoom in here once more, is to very simply add this link tag right over here into your HTML elements. And then inside of that HTML, because we have that link tag, any class that corresponds to any Bootstrap class is going to provide us with styles that Bootstrap is supplying us with. However, the only issue that we're facing right now is inside of our Nuxt application, there actually isn't any HTML file. So how in the world are we going to get this link tag connected to our Nuxt application? So that's what we're going to be doing inside of this video. We're going to figure out how we can get this link tag connected to basically every single component and page in our app. Now, because we want to have this as a global style, so any single component as well as any single page in our application has access to these Bootstrap classes, what we can very simply do is actually plug it inside of the nuxt.config.ts file. So this is just a place where we can configure our Nuxt application. And we can configure it in many different ways. But the way that we want to configure it right now is very simply add this link tag to almost every single component that we have. And that's exactly what we are going to do. So let's go over here. And what we're going to do is specify meta. This is just basically metadata that we're going to be specifying. And then right in here, we're going to specify a link. Now, this is going to be an array because we can have multiple links throughout our app. We can have this link. We can have other links if we want. Now, over here, we're going to provide an object. And then right in here, we're going to specify the rel. So right over here, this is this portion right over here. So we're going to specify that this is going to be a style sheet. So let's go here. We're going to say rel style sheet. And then what we're going to do is specify the href. So this is this component of the link tag. So we're going to go ahead and grab that. Let's go ahead and grab that like so. and then we're going to do href, and we're going to go ahead and add that href. So let's just go ahead and save that. And that right there is all it is that we need in order to get Bootstrap working with our application. So anytime we use a Bootstrap class, we actually should see those styles in our app. Now, in order to test this out, what I recommend doing, anytime you make any sort of change in the config, I recommend just closing your application, closing your development server by doing Control-C, and then running it again. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say hello. So I'm going to say hello over here. And once I do that and I go back to my Nuxt application, just waiting for it to load, I should see a blank page with hello. Let me zoom in here. There we go. We see it. I'm like 500% zoomed in. So right here, we see it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this with a class called container. So this is going to be a default Bootstrap class that I am going to add in here. And what it should do is essentially provide some margin and wrap this somewhere more in the middle. So over here, I'm going to go ahead and save that. And there you go. You can kind of see it. Now, you might not be able to see it that much because it's really zoomed in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of it for now. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Hopefully, you can kind of see the hello over here. And I'm going to go ahead and add that container again. And you can see here that we do indeed get it. You can see that there's a little bit of a margin here, and it is working a-okay. So I hope that is clear, and that is how we are going to connect these global style sheets inside of the nuxt.config.ts. In this video, what we're going to do is build out our landing page. So let's remember exactly how our landing page looked like. So we had the nav bar, then we had this H1 header that just says welcome to Restaurantly, which is our application. And then we had a button or a link that will allow us to navigate to the list of top 50 restaurants. So very, very simple landing page. So let's actually go ahead and begin with the nav bar. Now, the nav bar would be a relatively complex and cumbersome thing to build ourselves. But we are actually going to utilize Bootstrap for this, and you're going to see how much easier it is going to be. So let's actually go ahead and, like usual, what we're going to do is we're going to create a component folder for this. So let's go over here. We're going to say components. And then over here, we're going to say nav.view. And let me go ahead and rename that to nav.view. So over here, we're going to house our component. We're going to have our template tags like so. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go to Bootstrap right over here, and then we're going to go to the components section. Inside of the components section, we're going to click on navbar. Once we click on navbar, you're going to see this navbar right over here. And this is actually the one that we are going to be utilizing for our navbar. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to click copy to clipboard to just get all of this code. And I'm going to go ahead and just paste it right over here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this container. And over here, I'm just going to say hello, get rid of that as well. And then I'm going to render that nav bar. So I'm going to go ahead and render that nav. So let's go over here, and as you can see, we have our wonderful nav bar. Now, of course, there's quite a bit of things that we need to change. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to change the color of this. I don't want it to be light. I would rather it be dark. So to do that, what we're going to do here is we're in the nav tag right over here. You can see there's a bunch of classes. We're going to specifically focus on these classes right over here. We're going to change this from navbar light to navbar dark, and from BG light to BG dark. That's pretty much all we need to do to get it nice and dark. Now over here, there's a bunch of different elements that we don't need. For example, this button here, we can completely get rid of it. Over here, let's go ahead and use this anchor tag, and we're going to keep this as home, but this should redirect us to slash. Right over here, this should redirect us to restaurants. So we're going to say slash restaurants here. So over here, it's going to be /restaurants, like so. And then over here, I think we can remove this whole li. Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of this li. And let's get rid of this form entirely as well. So now you should have a navbar that looks a little something like this. So the last thing that I want to do is I want to add one more style in order to move this bar right over here all the way to the left. So in order to do this, what we're going to do is I am going to go right over here to this UL that's housing these LIs. And I am going to call this margin L auto. So margin left auto. Now, I don't believe that's an actual tag inside of Bootstrap. So what we're going to do here is we're going to manually say margin left and then auto. So what this is going to do is just going to move it to the right as much as possible. So we're going to go ahead and save that, and there we go. So you can see now we have our nav bar, and when we click on these specific links, you can see it actually redirects us to /restaurant. So if I go here, it might be a little bit too small for you guys to see, but I just copied it to the clipboard. This is what it redirected me to. And then when I click on like navbar or home, then it's gonna redirect me. Well, actually over here with the navbar, we gotta change that to /. And honestly, let's go ahead and change this to restaurantly. Keep in mind, restaurant is kind of a tough word to spell, so make sure that you're spelling it correctly, especially on these right over here. So make sure that you spell that correctly. So let's go over here, and now if I click on this, you can see maybe very faintly that it's going to redirect us to the home page. So that's pretty much it. So now we got our nav bar. Now what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to create a div, and inside of this div I'm going to create a container. I'm going to style this container manually as well. So I'm going to say container, and then over here I'm going to say this is going to have a text align of center, and I believe that should be really it. Then right over here we're going to say h1. We're just going to simply say welcome to restaurantly, like so. So there we go. We have our nice header. Obviously not the prettiest application in the world, but whatever. We're here to learn, not to build beautiful applications. So let's give it a margin top of around 5 rems. I like that a lot. And then right over here, let's also add another anchor tag that's going to take us to restaurants. Keep in mind, again, try your best to spell this correctly. This is a difficult word to spell. Restaurants. So restaurants with an S. Then over here, go to restaurants or whatever. Like so. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the landing page. Now over here, we can click on it. We get redirected to /restaurants. However, of course, the page is staying exactly the same. So now what I want to do is I want to have the ability to have multiple pages in my Nuxt application. We're going to explore exactly how we can do that in the next video. We created our home page, but now what I want to do is add the ability to navigate across pages. So what do I mean by that? Well, right now we are on the home page, and this is the current path we are at. However, when I click on restaurants, as you can see, the path changes to /restaurants, but right here we are not presented with a brand new page. Of course, now what I want to do is if we go to different paths, I want to show different pages, different UI elements that accord with that path. So why is it that no matter where we go, we're only showing this right over here, this landing page inside of the app.view file? Well, this is intentional. So if we utilize the app.view, it's going to treat our Nuxt application as just one page application, a single paged application. And no matter what path we go to, this is the HTML that we are going to render. So what we need to do is we actually need to utilize a different format if we want to have different pages, multiple pages with multiple HTML structures. So what is that path? Well, let's actually look at a diagram in order to understand this. So in order to do this, what we're going to need to do is first completely remove our app.view file. We don't want to use that anymore because we want to have multiple pages. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to create a pages directory, and it has to be called pages, and it also has to be all lowercase. I know the P here is capital case, but it has to be all lowercase. Now, inside of this pages directory, we're going to have multiple view files similar to the app.view, as well as any components that we have. Now, over here, let's say we create a restaurant.view file. Now, any view file inside of this pages directory is going to be treated very, very in a special manner. I know that English wasn't probably great, but let me explain exactly what I mean here. So we have this restaurants.view file, and what ends up happening is when we end up going to localhost 3000/restaurants, which is the name of the file, it is going to take this template right over here, the template inside of this view file, and render that. Now, let's say we create a file called hello.view inside of this pages directory. Then if we go to localhost/hello, then it's going to render the template in this file. Now, you might be asking, well, what do we do in the case where we just want to render something on localhost 3000 with no path? Well, in this case, what we're going to do is utilize index. So we're going to call our file index. And by default, what that's going to be is just a regular slash like so. So in order to essentially duplicate the app.view, but with this pages structure, what we can do here is create a pages directory. And then in here, we're going to create an index.view file. I cannot believe that keeps happening. Index.view like so. And then we can just grab everything inside of this app.view file and just paste that in there. And now what we need to do is delete the app.view file. So let's go ahead and remove that. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and now refresh, and I'm going to go to localhost 3000, and right away you can see that we have our app. Now, something interesting happens when I click on restaurants, and you may have gotten a quick glimpse of this. So when I click on restaurants, now we're getting a 404 page, and that's because now that we're using this pages structure, well, we need to have a restaurants.view file in there to render some HTML. Before, when we had that app.view, we were just going to render that everywhere regardless of what it was. But now we need a restaurants.view file in order to render the correct HTML template. So this is exactly how we are going to start creating multiple pages throughout our application. And this is so much easier than configuring it ourselves with Vue. This is just kind of done automatically for us. Okay, so let's actually go ahead and create a restaurants.view file in here. So I'm going to say restaurants.view. Mind the name. The name is very, very important because we are going to be navigating to restaurants right over here. So let's remember that we're navigating to restaurants. So the name over here should be exactly the same as this. Now, right over here, let's create a template. Let's create a div. And then let's also grab this nav bar. Let's paste that nav bar in there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have an H1 saying, hello, this is the restaurants. Restaurants. Restaurants is always such a tricky word to spell. Okay, so now let's go back over here. I'll do a quick refresh. Now when I click on restaurants, you can see now we get redirected to this page with this HTML template. In this video, what we're going to do is go ahead and build out the restaurants page. Now let's remember exactly what this is going to look like. We have the nav bar, but we're also going to have this table right over here that's going to show the top 50 restaurants. Now, building this from scratch, building out the HTML as well as the CSS is going to be relatively cumbersome, boring, and it's not really going to be Nuxt related. So just for the HTML and CSS, what we're going to do is just copy the component that builds out this table. But anything related to Vue and JavaScript and Nuxt, we are going to do from scratch. So let's actually go ahead and do this. Now, in order to do this, what I need you to understand is this is going to be made up of two different components. So we have the table as a whole, and then within each table, we have these rows, and this row is going to be a component as well. So let's go ahead and go over here to our components directory, and I'm actually going to create a restaurant component directory right over here. Now in here, I'm going to create a table.vue file like so. Now attached to this video, you should be able to copy and paste the boilerplate template for both the table as well as the row. So I'm going to go ahead over here and I'll attach both of them in the video so you don't have to go search around. But you can see here we get this nice template. So let's go ahead and copy that in. I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. So this is for the table. So we got this div. We have this h1, and then right over here, we have the table container. And then in here, we have both table columns. So as you can see here, we have two columns. And then over here, we have, well, two divs that are going to house our rows. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then over here, I'm also going to create a row.vue file. Now I'm going to go back. Again, I'll have this linked for you guys. Just go ahead and copy this. Again, just the HTML as well as some CSS, so we don't waste time doing this ourselves. All right, there we go. So you can see now we got this row. We have an H4 that's indicating the rank. And then over here, we have the anchor tag that indicates a thing, the actual restaurant. Now this is hard-coded, but obviously later on, we're not going to hard-code this. We are going to make it dynamic. So now what I want to do is I actually want to go to this table and just render one restaurant row. So remember how to do that. You go over here. This is the directory where the row lives. So it's going to be restaurant row is the component that we want to render. So restaurant, and again, keep in mind the spelling, restaurant row. Very difficult word to spell. And now what we're going to do is inside of here, we're going to get rid of this H4. We're going to create a div. We're going to wrap this in a container. And then in here, we're going to say restaurant like so. And then we're going to say table just to render the table. So let's go over here and let's do a quick refresh. And there you go. You can see we have our wonderful table. So now what do we want to do? Well, now, of course, what we want to do is, I think, let's iterate over the array of restaurants and render a row for each particular restaurant. So I think that is the best thing to do at the moment. So that actually begs the question, well, where are we going to get that data from? So where are we going to get this restaurant data? Well, similarly to the row as well as the table file, I actually have some hard-coded data that I'll also link in the attached to this video as well. So I'm going to go to it manually, but again, you guys are not going to have to do that. So this is just going to be a data.json file that's going to have a bunch of different data about restaurants. So I'm going to go here. I'm just going to grab all that. I'm going to grab every single one and copy that. And then over here, right in the root directory, I'm going to create a data.json file, and I'm going to paste that data in. Again, this is just hard-coded data. Typically, data would come from a server. We'll talk about how we can make HTTP requests to servers a little bit later. but there we go. This is what we have thus far. So each object has an ID, it has a rank, it also has the name of the restaurant, some content, which is lorem ipsum, which is consistent throughout every single one, the revenue, the number of stores they have, as well as an image. So this is the data that we have. So now what I want to do is inside of this table, I want to essentially iterate over that data, and then for each data, I want to render a restaurant row. So let's actually go ahead and do that. But in order to do this, what I want to do here, and let's actually take a look. What we want to do here is we want to render the first 25 in this column, and then the next 25 in this column. So we need to somehow split this because the data is just one large array. So I actually have a suggestion. Let's just go over here. Let's say script setup. Let's get rid of all this. It's just the boilerplate that I always get. Script setup lang is equal to TypeScript because of course we are going to be using TypeScript. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new constant, and I'm going to call this restaurants organized. That's what I'm going to call it. And this is going to be an object. I'm going to say first, and this is going to be, and now what we're going to do is we're going to grab those restaurant data. So I'm going to say import restaurants from, and I'm going to say from at, just so we can go to the root directory, and then from data.json. So this is going to give us our restaurants. And I'm going to say that this is going to be, I'm going to go ahead and create a new array and destructure out everything in that array. And then I'm going to splice from 0 to 25. So this should give us the first 25 elements and attach it to this first object right over here. And then we're going to say maybe second. And then over here, we're going to say something like restaurants. And then over here, we're going to say dot splice. We're going to say start from 25, and I want the next 25, like so. And this should give us the first 25 as well as the second 25. So this is good. This is really good. Now, of course, what we can do is actually iterate over them in both of these columns. Now, you could argue that we could also make these columns components as well and then iterate over them, but we'll just leave it as is for now. So let's go over here. We're going to say v4, and what I'm going to say is v4, and I'm going to say for the restaurant, and then I'm going to say in restaurant organized dot first. And then, of course, we need to supply this with a key. So I'm going to say key is going to be equal to restaurant.id, because remember, this has an ID. Restaurant.id, like so. Let's go ahead and save that. And that should pretty much be it. This should allow us to render multiple different restaurants. And there we go. Well, not multiple different restaurants, but for each iteration, we're going to render a restaurant. Okay, so that's step number 1. Now let's go ahead over here and let's do the exact same thing. Now over here, what we're going to do is we're going to say restaurant.second. And there we go. So this is looking good. Now, of course, now what we need to do is, well, quite a bit of things. There's a lot that we actually need to do. So the first thing that we need to do, of course, is start accepting props. So we don't, hard code this data. We want to show more dynamic data. That's step number 1. Step number 2 would be to show this header right over here. So this would be another thing that we would want to show. And then the other thing that we are missing is the highlighting. So you can see here, over here we have this gray highlighting, then we have this white highlighting, then this gray highlighting, then this white highlighting. So this is what we have. And then obviously over here, we don't have that at the moment. So this is something that we actually need to work on. So let's do that in the next video. Let us go ahead and start implementing some of the things I discussed in the last video. The first thing that I want to do is I want to start passing some of the restaurant data as props to the row component. So right now, remember, everything is hard-coded. It's always 1. It's always McDonald's. But as you can see here, we have the rank. We also have the name for every single object inside of this JSON file. So what I want to do, ideally, of course, is to pass that data in from the table to the restaurant. Now, let's remember that this right over here has quite a bit of data, and the restaurant only needs to know these two things right over here. So instead of passing the whole thing, I'm just going to pass these two things, the rank as well as the name. So let's go ahead and do that. So right over here, I'm going to say something like name, and this is going to be equal to restaurant. Again, keep in mind the spelling, very, very tricky. And then over here, restaurant.name, and then we also want the rank. So I'm going to say that's going to be equal to restaurant.rank like so. Okay, I think that is pretty good. So now what we can do, and we can of course do the exact same thing for the other one, like so. And now what we can do is we can go over here, we can actually accept those props inside of the script. So I'm going to go ahead and create a script, get rid of this junk. I'm going to say setup, I'm going to say the lang is equal to TypeScript. So lang is equal to TypeScript. And then I'm going to say const props. And I'm going to say that this is going to be equal to define props. And then over here, we are going to define our props, of course. Now we're going to define our props with TypeScript. So let's create an interface. So say interface. We can just say here row props like so. So let's remember what we have here. So we're going to have a rank that is going to be a number. We're also going to have a name that is going to be a string. So now let's go over here. And then right over here, let's create those triangle brackets and paste that in there. And now we should have access to both the rank as well as the string right over here. So now what we can do is we can just say rank, and let's just to see if it works. Let's just refresh. And there we go. Now you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way to 25, and then all over here from 26 to 25. So that's good. Now let's go ahead and change the name. So let's just say name and refresh. For some reason it's not hot reloading, and there we go. So this is looking pretty darn good to me. One other thing that we're going to want to do is right over here inside of the href, this is going to be taking us to /restaurants/ the name of the restaurant. So that's that's important to note. So let's actually go ahead and implement that right now. So let's go right over here, and we're going to make this dynamic. Let's make this template literals like so. So over here, we're going to say, this is going to be /restaurants, and then / and then whatever that name of the restaurant is. Okay, so that's pretty much all it is that we need. So now if I refresh and let's say I click on Starbucks, I get redirected to /restaurant/Starbucks. Obviously, we're getting a 404 page, but we'll worry about that later. Okay, so that's pretty much, let's refresh this. So that's pretty much all it is that we need over here. So the next thing I want to work on is the styling. So maybe have some of the grayness right over here as well as some of the white. So one thing that we can do is very simply just look at the rank. And if the rank is, let's say, an odd number, we're going to show gray. If the rank is not an odd number, we're going to show just pure white. So that's pretty much all it is that we are going to do. So in order to do this, what we're going to do is at this row right over here, I'm just going to add a dynamic style. So I'm going to say if the rank modulo, so if the rank modulo 2, so if the rank modulo 2 is not equal to 0, so if it's not equal to 0, meaning that this is an odd number, then what I want to do is I want to add a background color. So I'm going to put this in this curly braces right over here. I'm going to say background color of RGBA. And we could also add a class, but let's just do this dynamically. And over here, we're going to say something like so. And then we're going to give it 0.15 of opacity. Now else, what we're going to do is just return nothing. We're going to keep it white. So now let's go over here, and there we go. Now you can see right away that it is looking a-okay. Now this actually might not be the best idea, because now you can see we're getting like this weird checkers pattern, and I don't like that per se. So maybe instead of actually using the rank, what I'm going to do is use the index, so that over here we're just going to start with 0, and therefore over here is going to be 0, over here is going to be 0. Therefore, this is always going to be the exact same color, which is exactly what we have right over here. So in order to do this, what we're going to need to do is actually pass the index down. So we're going to need to grab the index from here. So we're going to say index like so. And we're going to pass it down. We're going to say index is equal to index. And then over here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say index is equal to index. So we're going to change this up a little bit. So over here, we're going to accept the index as a number. And then over here, we're going to say index modulo 2 is equal to 0. And if that's the case, then we want to do that. And there we go. So now we get this this nice looking pattern that we have. Okay, so that's almost it. The last thing that we need to do is add this header right over here. So what I'm thinking of doing is actually introducing that into the row itself, because it's kind of like a row as well. However, obviously it's styled a little bit differently. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that this row is going to accept another prop, and this prop is going to be called the row type. So I'm going to say here row type, and this is going to be a string that is going to either be a header, or it's going to be whatever. And actually, maybe a better thing is just say is header, and this is going to be a boolean. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say div, and this too will have a class of row, and I'm only going to render this div if, and then only if it is a header. So I'm going to say is header. Now over here, we're going to have a else. So else, we're going to render this like so. And then right over here, what we're going to do is we are going to enter. We're going to have an h4. We're going to give this a class of header. And this is just going to say rank. And then over here, we're going to have another h4. We're going to give this a class of header as well. And this is going to say chain. Okay. And now what we need to do is to go back to the table. And then inside of the table, right above each row, we're going to render one extra restaurant row. So I'm just going to copy that. This is, again, a tough word to spell. And all I'm going to pass for props is header, and then is header is going to be equal to true, like so. Just like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this, paste that in there for both of them. And there we go. So now you can see that we have this header right over here. Now, one thing that we also should do in this case is we should make these optional. These props optional, because we're not passing the props for every single one. As you can see here, for this prop, what we're doing is we're not passing in the name and the rank, or nor are we passing in the index. So what we should do again is just make these optional, and we can do that by very simply just adding a question mark, saying that all these things are optional and you don't have to pass them in. Okay, so that's pretty much it, and that will build out our page. So this was relatively involved, and maybe you guys learned a little more Vue, but in the Nuxt standpoint, it was pretty stale. So from now on, we're actually going to be learning quite a bit of new Nuxt concepts. And specifically, what we're going to start working on is navigation. And specifically, again, what we're going to be working on is navigation to a specific page like so. So let's figure out exactly how we can do that. All right, everybody. Now what we want to do is create these dynamic pages. So when I click on, let's say, Wendy's, for example, it's going to redirect me, and let me zoom in here. It's going to redirect me to /restaurants/Wendy's. Now, as you can see here, we're getting a 404 page. But of course, now over here, what I want to render is some Wendy's content. If I refresh and then I go over here to, let's say, KFC, again, I get the same exact thing. So you can see the issue that we are facing right now. So how are we going to do this? Now, this is going to present two different problems. So right now, this is what we have. But now what we want to do is we want to actually append to the /restaurants other paths like so. So /Wendy's, /McDonald's, /whatever. So how are we going to add multiple paths inside of our application through this file structure? The second thing is that these paths are going to be dynamic because they could be McDonald's, they could be Wendy's, they could be whatever. So we can't really hard code them inside of our file. So let's first talk about exactly how we can have multiple paths inside of our application. So to do this, we need to look at our folder structure. So right now we have this pages directory, and inside of here we have this restaurants view file that is going to correspond to localhost 3000/restaurants. Now we're actually going to have to change this in order to have something like /restaurants/whatever. In order to do this, what we're going to do is instead of having a file, we're going to have a restaurants directory. And then right in here, we're going to have an index.js. And then what's going to happen here is it's going to be localhost 3000/restaurants and then /. Remember, index is absolutely nothing. It's going to be /. And now this restaurants, where is it coming from? It's coming from the folder right over here. So the folder name. Now what we're going to do is if we add another file, so let's say a mcdonalds.view file, then what we end up getting is /restaurants, which is the folder name, and then /McDonald's. So over here, we basically kind of achieved what we want to achieve right over here when we click on, let's say, McDonald's, for instance. Okay. And now if you want, of course, what we can do is we can add another file like Wendy's. We could do localhost 3000/restaurant/Wendy's, and that should take us to Wendy's. Now, obviously, this is not ideal. Adding a file for every single restaurant is not great, mainly because we're going to have a million files and because this data could be coming from a database and it could be dynamic. So we might not know exactly what is in there. So the thing is, the file structure, the HTML structure for whether it was Wendy's or McDonald's is exactly the same. The only thing that's different is going to be the data that we present, but the structure is exactly the same. So what we need to have is some sort of dynamic file that catches everything after /restaurants, no matter what it is. So whatever is after /restaurants, whether it's McDonald's or Wendy's or Camera or Diet Coke, we want to catch that and then render that generic HTML template. In order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to call our file brackets, these square brackets, and then over here we're going to say name, and then right over here what that is going to correspond to is /restaurants, the directory, and then /whatever. Whatever is in here, it doesn't even matter. So you can say McDonald's, you can say whatever, it's going to render whatever is in this file. So the magic here is the brackets. So these brackets right over here, these square brackets, are going to specify just a dynamic name. Now inside of the brackets, you can call this whatever you want. This thing right over here is going to become a variable that is going to be assigned to whatever you called it inside of the bracket. So I called it name, but you could call it ID, you could call it monkeys, you can call it whatever it is that you want. But again, it's the square brackets that does this magic. So let's actually go ahead and implement this. It should be a relatively simple implementation. So over here, I am going to go to the pages directory. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a restaurants directory. Again, keep in mind the spelling. It could be a tricky thing to spell. Now in here, I'm going to create an index.view file. I'm going to go ahead and grab everything in here and just paste that in there, because this and this are exactly the same, because this right here is in the root directory. It's just going to be /restaurants. This one is going to be /restaurants because it's in the restaurants directory, and then index obviously is not going to append anything. So let's go over here. Let's get rid of this because we do not need it. And just to prove to you that everything still works a-okay, I should be able to refresh this. And I might have to restart the whole server. Let's go here. Let's just restart the whole server. Sometimes when we make changes like that, we do have to restart the whole server, or maybe this wasn't even saved. That also could have been an option. But give it a few seconds, and once I refresh, there we go. As you can see, it's there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new directory. I'm going to say square bracket, and then in here I'm going to say name. Again, I can call this whatever it is that I want, but this is going to be the variable name, essentially, when I want to extract it inside of the script tags. And then right over here, I am going to say template, div, and I'm just going to say this is the restaurant data. Let's go ahead and save that. And now, if I click on Burger King, you should see this is the restaurant data. We always get this random error right over here. I think this is just a Nuxt internal error that they're going to have to fix. So I don't think this is our fault. This is just something that Nuxt has to fix. So over here, if I go to Arby's, you can see we get Arby's. If I go over here, I go to Culver. You can see where no matter where we go, we are getting that one page. So now what we want to do is we actually want to extract that name. And then once we extract that name, what we want to do is find all of the data over here and then render like the image, the store, the revenue, etc. So let's do that in the next section. In this video, what we're going to do is learn exactly how we can extract the name inside of our HTML. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to create a script tag, mark it as setup, and then we're going to say lang is equal to TypeScript, because we're going to utilize JavaScript to extract that name. So inside of Nuxt, there's a bunch of different things that we have called composables. And composables are essentially places where we can store global state. Now, of course, composables also have functions within them, which allows us to update that state as well. We'll talk about composables a little bit later, but typically composables start with the word use. So as you can see here, we have a bunch of different composables. We got use meta, use async data, use whatever, use router, use route, etc., etc., etc. Now what we're going to be utilizing is use route. So over here, we're going to say const route is equal to use route, and we're going to go ahead and invoke it like a function. Now what this is going to do is assign a bunch of different information about the route that we're currently inside of this variable. And now what we can actually do is from this variable, we can extract the path that we have over here. So we can actually do that very simply by saying const name is equal to route, dot params, because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the path parameter. And then specifically, what path parameter are we looking for? Well, we're looking for the name path parameter. Now, TypeScript is giving us a little bit of an issue right now, TypeScript issue, and this is just because we called this name. What we can actually do is just do import nothing from hashtag name, and that issue should, or hashtag app, and that issue should go away. Essentially what's happening is name is being declared somewhere in our application, and it's thinking that we're kind of duplicating that name. Now by adding this import, it's going to know that this is going to be scoped to this page, and there is no other declaration of name in here. So that's just a little simple trick that we can do. Okay, so now that we got the name, what we can actually do is go ahead and render it. So instead of rendering this, let's go here and let's just render the name itself. So let's go here, and if you zoom in a little bit, there you go. You can see we get McDonald's. And if I go back to restaurants, what's going on here? What's going on here? I'm not really sure. Let me just quickly restart my server. Let's restart that. Let's see. I still have my index file, and I think that should be fine. Sometimes Nuxt does some funky stuff. Let's see here. And there we go. Now it's looking good. And now if I click on Duncan, you can see I also get Duncan. Let's just click on one more. Let's click on, zoom out a little bit. Let's click on Jimmy John Gourmet Sandwiches. We get Jimmy John Gourmet Sandwiches. Okay, so this is looking really, really good. So now what I want to do is I actually want to grab that name, because this name is going to be unique. I want to grab that name, find the restaurant that has that name, get that object, and then render some HTML. So in order to do this, the first thing that we need to do is we need to, of course, get the restaurants. So let's actually change this import statement from that generic statement to import restaurants from, and then we're going to say at data like so. Again, this is going to go to the root directory and grab the data.json. And then what we're going to say here is const restaurant, just the restaurant itself. That's going to be equal to restaurants dot find. And then over here, I'm just going to say R. And then I'm going to say R dot name is equal to the name over here. So that's just going to be the restaurant itself. So now let's go ahead and try to render that JSON instead. So let's go ahead and do that. Now you can see we're getting a bunch of different data. So now we can actually populate that inside of HTML. Now I actually have a bunch of HTML and CSS hard-coded or copied and pasted right in here. So that's exactly what I'm going to use. I'm going to link this boilerplate HTML attached to this video, so do not worry, just so we don't have to do all the CSS stuff. But you can see here we just have, you know, an image. For the image, we got the name, we have the revenue, we got the store, etc. So if I were to save this, we get something that looks a little like this. Now, of course, we're going to have to actually now use this restaurant data to actually render this stuff dynamically. So let's go here. Let's just say restaurant.name. Over here, we can change this to restaurant.revenue. Number of stores. This is going to be restaurants. Let's go to the data.json. I forgot what it was called. Number of stores. Probably should have guessed that. Number of stores. And if we save that, you can see this one sucks. This one's way too big. Let's pick a better one. Let's go to Taco Bell. You see we get Taco Bell. We have this. We have that. Now all we need is the content. So let's go over here. And let's change that to restaurant.content. Now we should have the content. Last thing we need is the image. So over here, this should be restaurant dot image. Is that what I called it? Image URL is what I called it. Image URL. Okay, so there we go. And that's pretty much it. So now if we go back, we go to Restaurantly, we can navigate here, and then we can navigate. Maybe I want to get more information about in and out. And now you can see right away, we're getting all this new cool information. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. Now, one potential issue that we might run into is that what if right over here, let's just go back to something a little simpler. Let's go to McDonald's, for instance. So let's say, so right now this is what we have right now, right? But what if somebody put a path that corresponds to a name or a restaurant that actually doesn't exist inside of our data? So something like /hello world, for example. How would this work? Because right now, if we were to render this, what ends up happening is it goes inside of this file, because this file is going to catch that. This is a completely valid path for this file. So if I were to actually go over here and paste that in, you can see now we're actually going to get an error. So we're getting some sort of error. And if we go over here and we inspect that error, we go to our console. Maybe if I can do a quick refresh here. We're getting an error. We're just unable to render something. That's just what's happening. You can see it's just continuously spinning. Maybe if we go to this console here, it will show us exactly what the error is. If not, you guys probably just get the point. We have some sort of error. Right here, we have an error. And obviously, this isn't a great user experience. So this is the error right here. So it's saying, well, restaurant is null, and we're trying to access image URL from it. Obviously that's going to throw an error. So this isn't a good user experience. So instead what we want to do is maybe just say, hey, sorry, we cannot find this restaurant. So let's think about how we can do that in the next video. The last thing that I want to handle inside of this section is what if we go to a page that doesn't exist inside of our application. So let's say instead of going to /restaurants, I go to /hello world like so. We get thrown this really nice but Nuxt specific 404 page. And over here you can see it takes us to, well, it gives us the ability to go back over here. Now I actually really like this page. However, of course, in a real application, we're going to need to change this not into something that is specific to Nuxt. We're going to have to change it to something that is specific to our application. Now, our 404 page is not going to look as nice as this, but again, it's going to be tailored for our app, which is something we want to do. Essentially, what I'm going to teach you guys is how we can create our own custom 404 pages. And it's actually really, really easy. All you have to do is go over here to the pages directory, and then inside of the root directory, what you're going to do is you're going to create a 404.view file. So anytime we hit a 404, it's going to render this HTML right over here. So I'm actually going to go to the index file, and I'm just going to grab everything right in here, paste that right there, and then I'm going to say here something like page not found, and I'm going to say just go back, not go to restaurants, just go back like so. So that's pretty much all it is that we need to show. And now if I were to do a refresh, you can see now we have our own little custom 404 page. Obviously it's not as pretty, you guys can make it prettier, but it's custom to our own application. And now you can see we can go back to, let's go back to the home page, not to the restaurants. So let's go here, let's go to a 404 page like so. So page not found, go back, now we're over here again. Welcome everybody to a brand new section. In this section, what we're going to do is talk all about layouts. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's actually look at multiple pages throughout our application, and let's just look at some of the similarities that they have. So if I go to the restaurants page, you can see over here we have the nav bar, and then we have this content right over here. If I go back to the home page, we also have the nav bar, then I have the page specific content. If I go to, let's say, the 404 page, I have the exact same thing. I have the nav bar as well as the content. So right over here, you can see that there is a pattern. We have the nav bar as well as the code, the content specific to that page. Now, in order to accomplish this, at this point in time, what we're doing is inside of every single page, we're rendering the nav bar as well as the content right over here. So you can see nav bar, content, nav bar, content. So we're duplicating the nav bar across our application, even though this is a common layout that we have for almost every single page. So what we can do instead is actually define something, well, known as a layout. Now, to define a layout, as you can imagine, we're going to create a new directory called layouts. And this is going to be a view file. It's going to have multiple view files in here. Now, the first thing that we're going to define is the default layout. In order to do this, we're going to need to create a default.view file. Essentially, what this layout is going to be the layout that is going to be applied by default for every single page in our application. So over here, we're going to define a template. We're going to define a div. And then what we're going to say is, well, how is this layout going to look? Well, we're going to have the nav bar and then whatever content we have for that specific page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this nav bar and just paste it in there. And I'm going to get rid of all of the different nav bars right over here. I'm just going to get rid of them. Let's get rid of that. And let's get rid of this. And we do not have a nav bar inside of the name, so that should be okay. Let's go here. Let's save that. And let's save this. Now, as you can see here, we have no nav bar. But now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say each page should have the nav bar, and then it should have whatever content is specified in the page template. In order to specify that, we're going to use another special HTML template called slot. Essentially, this is going to correspond to whatever HTML we have inside of the actual page. So let's just go ahead and save that. And now if I do a quick refresh, you can see that, well, we have the bar, and then we also have the slot right over here. If I were to remove the slot, you can see now we're just going to have the bar itself. Now if I were to paste back the slot, then we have the actual content, which is what we want. So now you can see we're reducing the code duplicity across our application by using layouts. How cool is that? In this video, what we're going to do is build out a very simple ad banner, and we're going to place it in the bottom of this page as well as the bottom of this page as well. So let's just go ahead and do that. So right over here, I'm going to go to the components directory. Inside of the restaurants directory, I am going to create an ad.view file. And let's go ahead and build this from scratch. So template div. I'm going to give this a class of add container. I'm not going to call it just container because then it will have some of the styles that Bootstrap will give it. So I'm just going to say add container. I'm going to say h1, get the best restaurant guide like so. And then we're going to have also a button. So a button right over here. So button, and then let's give this button a closing tag. Now this button is going to have some Bootstrap classes. So let's go over here, give it a class of btn primary, and let's also give it btn large, like so. And over here, I'm going to say buy now. Now this button is not going to lead us anywhere. We're just going to create this banner. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to apply just a little tiny bit of styling. So let's go over here. I'm going to say style. And we're just going to apply some styling on the add container. So we're going to give it a margin of 10 rems 0. We're going to give it a flex align of center, or text align, not flex align. We're going to give it a font size of, let's say, 2 rems. We're going to give it a background color of RGBA. And then this is going to be 103, 103. And then over here, 231, and then 0.3. And lastly, we're going to give it some padding of 3 rems. Okay, so that's pretty much all it is that we need to do at this point. Now what we need to do is, of course, apply this ad inside of both those pages. So it's going to be this page over here, as well as this page right over here. So let's go all the way to the bottom of this page, which is right under this div. And I'm going to apply the restaurant ad like so. So now if we go over to any restaurant, let's say IHOP, and let's just do a quick refresh, we should see this ad right over here. Now I also want to place this ad right here. So let's go to here, and then let's also place that ad maybe right around here like so. Or is this even the right place? I don't think so. No, that's the wrong one. I want this index.view file. So maybe around here, I'm going to place that maybe even below the container. Why not? Let's say restaurant. So restaurant ad. Now you might be noticing a little bit of a pattern here. So what's the pattern? Well, right now, it's kind of similarly to what we did with the nav. You can see that, okay, we're placing the restaurant ad here, and we're also placing the restaurant ad here. And maybe later on, when we have multiple pages, we might also want to place a restaurant ad right in the bottom as well. So this is actually a perfect candidate for a layout. However, we do not want to place this inside of our default layout, because anything inside of the default layout will be applied for every single page inside of our application. Now, of course, we don't want that. We don't want to apply for every single page. We only want to apply for certain pages, specifically the two like really restaurant related pages. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to create a custom layout. And essentially what this layout is going to do is it's going to be added on top of the default layout for specific pages that we specify. So in order to create this custom layout, we're going to go to our layouts directory. And then inside of the layouts directory, we're just going to create a view file. And we can call this whatever file we want. We can call this restaurant ad file. We can call it whatever. Just to make things nice and clear, I'm going to call it custom.view. But again, we can call this whatever it is that we want, and it's probably preferable to call it something, more directly to what this layout is doing, not just custom. But just for documentation purposes and understanding, I'm going to specify custom.view, meaning that this is going to be a custom layout. So we're going to define our template, our div. And then what we're going to do is very similarly, we're going to define our slot, and then we're going to define our thing that we also want to add. Now, before we had the nav and then the slot, but this time we want the ad to be in the bottom. So we're going to do the slot first, and then we're going to do the restaurant ad like so. And now what we need to do is somehow apply this custom layout to, well, the specific pages that we want. So how in the world are we going to do that? Well, let's go to the page that we want. So let's go over here. And what is this page? Where is the pages? So let's begin with this page right over here. So this is the one that we want. So let's remove this restaurant ad, and instead what I want to do is somehow apply this layout. So in order to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to need to wrap everything with something known as a Nuxt layout component. So over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab everything here. I'm just going to cut it. So it'll be saved. And then I'm going to say Nuxt And then I'm going to say Nuxt layout like so. So Nuxt layout like so. And then I'm going to put in everything in here. This is going to be treated as the slot. And then I'm going to say name, and I'm going to specify the name of the file we want to specify the layout for. In this case, it's custom. So I'm going to say custom. And that's pretty much all it is that we have to do. So now I'm going to go ahead and do a quick little refresh. And if I go right in the bottom, you can see I still see this. So it applies both the default layout, which we don't have to specify because it's just a default. And then there's also this other layout. Now, if I decide to go to home, I didn't specify that layout, so I don't see it here. Now, there's one more place that we got to do that in. So I'm just going to copy this down. And let's go over here. And let's just wrap this whole thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to wrap this thing, so this VIF, with that Nuxt layout. Because this VL is showing kind of a different page. It's not really showing, it's showing the restaurant has not been found. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go here and I'm going to have this nice Nuxt layout, and I'm only going to render this layout and the slot underneath it if the restaurant is defined. And then let's just go here. Let's find where this div ends. Then right over here, I'm going to close it like so. So you can see we're actually kind of conditionally rendering this layout, only if we're rendering the actual restaurant. So now let's go click on Taco Bell. And there we go. We see our custom layout. There is one more thing that we want to discuss when it comes to Nuxt layout. And in order to demonstrate this, what I want to do is I want to take a look at our error pages. So the first error page that we can get is when we go to a page that doesn't exist inside of our Nuxt application. We get this 404 page right over here. So you can see we have the header, and then we have this anchor tag that is going to lead us to go back. The other error page that we can get is when we try to fetch a restaurant that doesn't exist in our database, which is just a file. And we get something relatively similar. So over here you can see we have this restaurant's header, this just saying that, hey, something was not found. But this time we have a button, but it kind of serves the exact same purpose, even though it's a different element. It just allows us to go back to where we want to go back. So what I'm going to do now is let's assume that what we want to do is add a sad face right in between the button as well as the header. Just a little sad face just to indicate that this is an error page. So let's just go ahead and do that. So right in the 404 page, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly go ahead and copy this in. So paste this in. It's just a div. And then right over here, we have this image tag, and it has a URL to a sad face. You can go ahead and follow along. Just pretty much go on the internet and find any sad face, and this should be okay. And then I gave it a width of 10 rems, just to make it nice and small. So now if I were to go to, let's say, anything, you can see we get this right over here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the name section. And this is where we're rendering the error. I'm going to kind of display the exact same thing. So right over here, I'm going to display a div with that sad face. And then right below, let's also display that this is going to be 10 rems. Okay, so now let's just go back over here. Let's go to the restaurants. Let's pick McDonald's. Let's just add some stuff to McDonald's. Now you can see we have this. So you can see that this is actually, so these two pages, and let's just kind of have them side by side. Let's go here, and now let's just go to any page. So you can see that these two pages, even though they are different, they're fundamentally the same. So right over here, you can see we have a header, and then over here, we also have a header. Now, the stuff inside of the header is different. So that's something to keep in mind. And then we have this sad face that has the same exact styling. And then over here, we have this go back button. And then over here, we also have this go back anchor tag. So you can see the elements are a little bit different. But again, the structure is fundamentally the same. So this is actually still a good candidate for a layout. But we have to be creative with the way that we actually create this layout, because we need somehow to customize the element as well as customize the text. So let's actually go ahead and create this layout right now. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to create a layout, and I'm going to call this layout, let's call it error, because this is just going to be symbolizing error pages. So I'm going to say error.view. And then right over here, I'm going to say template div. And now what we need to do is define, okay, we're going to have an H1. We're going to have some header here. So we're going to have some sort of header here. This has to be customizable. And then I'm going to go ahead and just grab this. I'm just going to grab that. And I'm going to paste that in there because this is always going to be consistent. And might as well also grab the styles. And let's go over here to the style. Let's make it nice and scoped. And let's go ahead and paste that in there as well. And then the last thing that we need is either a button or an anchor tag. For now, I'm just going to say button, and I'm going to say go back. So something like this. And if I were to go to this 404 page at the moment, let's go ahead and just get rid of this image. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this with a Nuxt layout. So I'm going to say Nuxt layout, and then Nuxt layout like so. And let's see where this ends. So this should be right over here. And I'm going to give this a name of error. Now you probably imagine what's going to happen here. So if I go ahead and now I go over here and I refresh, you can see this is what I end up getting. So not the greatest look in the world. Plus, obviously, this isn't exactly the stuff that we want. So what is it that we want specifically? So specifically, what we're gonna want is, and actually, let's put the container above the layout so we can have the styling at least, like so. There we go. That's looking better. So now what we want to do is somehow specify that this is the header that we want to inject into this layout. And in order to do this, what we're going to use is slots. So we've used slots before to symbolize the entire HTML in a particular page, but we can also use slots to symbolize specific elements in our page. So over here, inside of our header, we're going to say slot. And we're going to give this slot a name. So we're going to say slot, and then we're going to say header like so. So that's pretty much all it is that we're going to do. And then right over here, what we're going to do is we're going to have another template. So we're going to say template, and then we're going to say template like that. And then in here, we're going to give this template essentially the name of that slot by saying hashtag and then the name of the slot, which is header. And then right over here, we're going to say H1 page not found. So essentially what's going to happen here is right in the slot, it's going to only render what's happening right over here. So this H1. Now, as you can imagine, we can do the exact same thing now with the button. So over here, I can say slot name. Let's just call this redirect element, or just L, let's say. And let's go ahead and save that. Then over here, what we can do is pretty much say that we want this template, and this is going to be the redirect element. We're going to go ahead and save that. And again, we do not have to add that image because that image is displayed right over here in between these two slots. So let's go here now, and I'm going to do a quick little refresh, and there we go. You can see that it is working a-okay, and it's working. If I press go back, we're going back. Now let's go ahead and do the exact same thing, but for this error page right over here. So this one, we have our VLs. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to wrap this with a Nuxt layout. So let's do a Nuxt layout. Let us just wrap this entire div with that Nuxt layout. I'm going to move also that VLs into this layout. And over here, I'm going to say name is equal to error. Now we're going to remove this because we do not need that anymore, because that's going to be defined in the layout itself. And then I'm just going to go ahead and kind of copy what we had here. So we had this template, and let's go here. And I'm going to go ahead and cut that and paste that in there. Now over here, we are getting some sort of just ESLint error. That's fine. That's whatever. That's okay. It's just an ESLint error. We could even disable that ESLint error later. And then now we can just go ahead and grab this template for the redirect element. We can just grab this button now. And instead of the Nuxt link, we can just have a button like so. And that's pretty much all it is that we need. Okay, here's actually what it's upset about. So the first thing I gotta do is actually gotta change this to error, which is the actual name of our layout. And then over here, if you hover over it, it's saying that it's expecting a custom element, but right above it, it's a div. So essentially what we should have here is we should have the Nuxt layout right over here, which we should have had in the first place. And then the VLs over here. And then our Nuxt layout would be like so, just wrapping up the template. And now we have our redirect over here. So this should work. And now if we try to, let's go run our server again. Let's go ahead and do a quick little refresh. So now if I go to, let's just go to a random page. You can see we got the sad face. And now if I go to restaurants, let's click on this burger place. And I'll just change this. You can see now we have this sad face right over here. The styling is a little bit off. Of course, we can go ahead and fix that, but I'm just not going to fix it just for the purpose of time. And this isn't really a styling place, but you can see we still have the same structure. Welcome everybody to a brand new section of our application. In this section, what we're going to do is we're going to improve the SEO, which is the search engine optimization of our Restaurantly application, by adding metadata to our pages. So metadata, you can think of it as just more description of our pages. So we can describe our page, you can supply a header to our page, and this usually isn't something that we end up seeing on the screen, but rather it is seen by web crawlers, and it can again improve the SEO, which of course is great because then our website is going to be ranked higher than other ones. So the first thing that I'm going to do, and we're not going to dive deep into the SEO portions of this, there's a lot of other Udemy courses for that. What we're going to very simply do is we're going to add a title to our page, and the title is actually the thing that we end up seeing right over here in the tab. So right now, again, maybe very, very faintly, you can see that the tab actually just says localhost 3000. And this isn't that great. Maybe I'd rather it say Restaurantly. And then when I click on, I don't know, a particular restaurant, I think it would be nice to dynamically change the tab to say McDonald's or Taco Bell or whatever. So this is something that we want to do. And of course, we can add other metadata depending on our SEO requirements. We can add a description. We can add whatever it is that we want. So let's go ahead and let's actually begin with the home page. So let's go over here. Let's go to our index.view file. And in order to add metadata, what we can actually do is right before this div, or right after or right before this div, so right over here, what we can do is we can actually add a HTML element like so. So HTML, this is going to be capitalized because this is going to be a component. And then over here, we can just go ahead and close it. And then right inside of this HTML element, we can specify all of our different metadata. Now, one thing that's nice is also inside of this HTML element, we can specify, for example, the the language. So we can also have a boolean like so, saying that if this is going to if dynamic, so dynamic is greater than 50 characters, then what we're going to do is we're going to utilize English GB, and then else what we're going to do is we're going to utilize English US like so. So we can supply that if you want. Now right in here we can also supply some other HTML elements. So we can specify the head like so, and then inside of the head we can supply the title. So we can say title, and we can say the title here is going to be just very simply restaurantly. So now if I go ahead and I save that, you can see right here now the tab says restaurantly. Okay, so this is looking really, really good. And now we can of course supply some other data if we want. So over here we can supply meta for the metadata. And then over here we can supply it with a bunch of different props. So we can say name is going to be equal to description. And then over here we can say colon a content. And then here we can say is equal to, and then we can just say whatever it is that we want. And I'm actually going to remove the colon. I'm just going to say my page is cool. Something like that. Again, we can add whatever it is that we want. Another thing that we can actually do is change the fav icon per page. So we can actually do that by saying link like so. And then in here, we can say that the relationship, the rel, is going to be preload. And then we can specify the actual image. So over here, what we can very simply do is we could have an image inside of our assets directory, which I don't have at this moment in time. So let's actually go to our error layout. And let's just grab this image right over here. And this is going to be our fav icon. Now this isn't something that we're going to see right away. And then over here we should say as script as well. So as script like so. Now this is something that we're not going to see right away. It actually takes quite a bit of time for the fav icon to show. But later on it should show. So this is something that we can also do as well. And of course now we can actually apply this to multiple pages. So over here I can actually come and add that to the restaurant page. So I can go to this index.view, and then right over here I can also add the header, and I can say that this title, so this title is going to be top 50 restaurants in the world, like so. So now I can copy that. And now let's go back over here. Let's go. So now we're at Restaurantly. You can see the tab says Restaurantly. If I move to top 50 restaurants, you can see now we have top 50 restaurants in the world. So you can see that this is a nice way of doing things. And of course, we can also do the exact same thing with the dynamic restaurants. Over here, we can have an HTML and then just very simply just grab this restaurant name and showcase that. However, this one's a little bit trickier because, well, this is going to be dependent if we can actually find that particular restaurant. And actually, I think it might be nicer if we can somehow specify the metadata, in this case, inside of the script tag. And that's actually possible. So we'll talk about how we can do that in the next video. And this is just going to be an alternative. At the end of the day, it's going to be doing the same thing, but it's just an alternative of doing the exact same thing. In this video, we're going to look at another way to define the metadata of our page. So we saw that we can actually add these HTML at the very top, and that's going to correspond, of course, to the metadata. Right over here, we have the head, title, meta, link, etc. But if we want, we can actually also define the metadata inside of the script tag. And let's remember that before we actually did something, or we used something called use route in order to get access to the route information. we can use something else, another composable that is very similar to this, but instead it's going to be called used meta to store all of the meta for that particular page. So let's actually go right over here, and then what we can do is we can very simply say at the very top or the bottom of the script tag, doesn't really matter, we can say use meta. We can just go ahead and invoke that. And then right over here, what we can do is we can say the title is going to be the restaurant name. So let's actually define this below the restaurant. So once we actually find the restaurant, I'm going to say that this is going to be the restaurant.values. Now, if that is actually defined, so if, remember, this could be null, then what we're going to do, if that is defined, then we're going to say we want to use that actual restaurant name. However, if it is not defined, we're going to return just a 404, and then we're going to say restaurant not found. So you can see here we can do this nice little conditional title using the use meta composable. All right, now we can also define other things. So we can also define the meta if we want. So we can say in here, maybe we want a name. We can say here viewport. And over here, we can also define, content, for example, here. And we can say, the viewport is going to have a width of device dash viewport, etc., etc. So we can define again whatever it is that we want. All right, so that's pretty much all it is. Let's actually go ahead and give this a quick little test. As you can see now it's actually a dynamic title. So you can see we have McDonald's over here. If I go back and then I click on like KFC, for example, you can see we have KFC. If I click on, a restaurant that doesn't exist, then over here, what we're going to get is, we're getting that restaurant for some reason. So that is not working as expected. So over here, we're saying restaurants dot values. So, right here, this should be restaurant dot value, not restaurants dot values. So we're going to say if we actually indeed get a restaurant like so, then what we're going to do is actually show the name. Okay. Now you can see we get a 404 restaurant not found. Now over here we have KFC.